I don't even remember what I put on for bumper music, but I'm sure it's good.
Lynn loves your laugh, Lenny.
Good. I like it too. I like to laugh. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever in the world you might be, right now you're in the new way on Steampunk Radio with 2 E's. I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme. I'm the host of your show today. You might be listening to it on Steampunk Radio. You might be listening to it on the TuneIn app. You might be listening to us through Discord, or you might just be listening to a podcast sometime in the future. Today is the 28th of May. Is it May already? Hard to believe it can be May, but we're going to start off with some bumper music as we always do. Without you, there's no point to this song. George Harrison, back in the 1980s. And this song, is very pertinent to another song that was called My White Knight. And My White Knight was something that George Harrison wrote, and beautiful song, very good, went to #1 on the charts, and he got sued for it by somebody who claimed that they had written the song. And so this song was a response to this lawsuit. And what it goes into is that music gets channeled into people. And Harrison channeled the song, but the melody of the song was channeled to other people at the same time. And the songwriters write down the songs that they get channeled, and then they put words to it, and the music plays. But the music is there in an infinite place, and it's got its own morphic field, so that when you step into the music, you get absorbed into that morphic field. And sometimes, if you don't know the backstory of the music, you get taken to different places. But if you know the backstory, you go to the place that the author of the music wanted you to go to. And that place is fundamental in time, somewhere outside the timeline that we're on. But when you get to good music, it takes you on to different timelines. And the concept of timelines is a very interesting one. The time is always now. And so past, present, and future all meld into a kaleidoscope that we are always in the present. We do not have access to the future except linearly, or the past except historically. But in natural terms, all these are happening simultaneous all at once. But you can't jump between parallel timelines unless something shifts and you change something in your belief system. Now, belief system is one of those things that's really, really crucial here. And there's a lot of people telling you that belief is a lie and that you have to believe in absolute truth. But absolute truth is relative to the person speaking that truth. And relative truth builds up into an absolute truth that is not achievable from the perspective that we're at, because we don't have full access to transfer to past, present, or future. Now, the way that time travel works, and yes, you can see there is time travel on the basis of the Mandela effect, is that once you leave this current time by using time travel, you cannot negotiate back to this time and place in this setting. You can negotiate back to something parallel and similar, but the changes that you made in another time are consistent with the evolution of time within that world. And since you're caught in that world, determinism doesn't allow you to get back to the same place. So you have the option of leaving. You might even have the option of remote viewing and not leaving, but seeing. But you don't have the option of leaving and coming back to here in this form. There are very related forms that are in parallel time, but there's also a concept I'd like to introduce called perpendicular time. And perpendicular time comes about when you on a timeline choose to do something different that's out of character from the morphogenic field that you've established that time is relying on you to remain in. So when you break out of your morphology and take a tangent and do something completely different, now your consciousness is in a place that's not on the real timeline, and you have an adventure outside of time. It's not outside of time really, because time is at every fractal scale there is, but it's outside of time in the dimension that we're aware of here from our perspective on human scale. Now, if you go to the Planck constant, 10 to the minus 34th, and you go out into the deepest reaches of space, 10 to the positive 89th, add 89 and 34, and you get 123, I would say that there's 144 different fractals that envelop to make the historical time loop that we're in. So we have 121 that are visible, and the other 23 are invisible at this time, but being revealed on the basis of discovery as we find more and more the things that we were taught that were true and always have been true are not only not true, but they're true in a fractal sense that they hold within our current reality, but not our past reality. But since we remember our past reality very vividly, and it's different from our current reality, we have what's called the Mandela effect. And the Mandela effect takes us into simultaneous realities that have physical differences, but those physical differences are small and don't really affect the parallel times. But we're on a change from a parallel path to a perpendicular path, and the perpendicular paths don't need the self-similarity that adjacent fractals have to have in a mathematical sense. So let's say we've got adjacent fractals of human scale and ant scale. Humans can see ants and know that they do things on ant scale that are way beyond the capacity of humans to think about, except when we make our ant farms and we actually watch what's going on underground. But in the mind of those ants, do humans even matter? If we were an ant and we saw a giant human, the time constant that we have in ant world would give us centuries in milliseconds on human scale. And so the process of time is a function of scale, and we've uncovered now a whole new development in perpendicular and parallel time. It turns out that information has been sequestered from us people for a long, long time. And they created something in the United States called the Freedom of Information Act. And the Freedom of Information Act meant that you were able to petition the government for information that they might have that you don't have access to because it was declared secret for security reasons or to hide something that they didn't want us to know, or some reason that it was put away secret. But the fighting over the freedom of information has gotten to the point where judges are ruling that you must release this information. So within the past year, the KGB, through Vladimir Putin, the head of the Russian government, released a dump of about 15 million pages of information, over 1 million documents, all 1985 or before that, that explained a lot of what was going on in the Russian vision of the world pre-1985. And it introduced a concept of a Tartarian state. And then the CIA here in the United States, because some federal judge said they had to open up and drop some documents, ended up dropping about 1.5 million new documents about 3 months ago that involved a lot of stuff. And SMQAI, a buddy of mine, is going into the mind control stuff. But in both sets of documents, there has been so much new stuff released that researchers are getting ahead of the game and figuring out what was there in these released documents and are putting together an alternative history of what has happened up to this point in time on this particular Earth. But this particular Earth happens to be changing due to Mandela effects caused by the introduction of time travel, which hasn't been invented yet, but once it's invented, makes our concept of current time irrelevant. Irrelevant. So today I've got with me Andreas Xirtus and several other players from the Tartarian investigation team that can explain how we've gotten to the point where we are physically visiting star forts worldwide and coming up with a second history that overlays the history that we've been taught, which is a fiction created by the victors of World War II. Andreas, welcome to the New Way.
Thanks so much for having us. I really appreciate it. That was probably the clearest cut introduction so far to anybody who has no information about this, because we just run so far ahead now. People keep asking us what the heck is going on. So that was, I hope we can use that little clip at some point just as an intro. That's a very clean cut piece.
And it's recorded, and it took, 10 minutes?
Well, I mean, we're definitely running around trying to record with each other as much as possible. The thing is, the few people that know about this, we haven't had time to catch other people up yet. I've been really lucky, I guess. I've had sort of a lifetime head start as I'm a Croatian American. My family, and then Spanish on my mother's side. Both families come from the old country and have stories about a lost land that had to do with the Tatars of the Tartars. I had books in my house growing up with the Kingdom of Tartar. Somehow, about 2 or 3 years ago, everyone just started kind of whispering about this story, and it's become this weird thing where all of a sudden I've become somebody who knows enough about it that people ask me questions, and I ask them questions, and we've kind of put together TartaryNova.com as a way of getting those answers out to other people, and also so that we can keep building on the information, because there just wasn't anything out about this except for the Freedom of Information Act paperwork that you just brought up from the CIA and the KGB that mentioned, I think in 1968, that they wanted to introduce a Tartarian state as a historical concept. The CIA did in order to influence the Soviet culture and move it away from a universalist back to a Tartarian centric model. At the same time, we've seen all this information the last 20 years coming out of Russia. Ever since the crash of the wall, we've noticed there's lots of examples of Tartarian ruins and Tartarian cities that were just too modern to fit what the Americans had understood about Tartary. I mean, we've been told, I'd heard about it in school as the land of the vegetable sheep. They'd say in philosophy class, be careful not to believe in Tartary, which if they're telling you to be careful not to believe in something you've almost never even heard of before, just in case you might ever stumble across it, that should give you a clue that there's something there. But, in general, there's more to it than just some imaginary vegetable sheep. There's this guy, the Soviet Union is trying to kind of sequester for a while, but after the fall, they've kind of allowed people to know more and more about a man named Fomenko. And Fomenko is a mathematician and chronologist who found out that sometime around 660, would you believe it, 66, maybe 666, maybe 661 to 666, the J in front of the calendar for in the year of our Lord was changed to a 1, because 1,000 just sounds cooler. And ever since then, we've been looking into it and finding that we're probably not living in the year 2019. We're probably living in some sort of a 17th century or something 1,000 years different than we should expect. And that's been kind of a weird thing to find out, especially when we find out that there's so many different states that have been created in that time. America, we think of as this new country, sure, but the United Kingdom is a pretty new country by that logic. The London Fire is supposed to be 1666, and before that, what is England, right? But a bunch of kingdoms. The same thing with warring kingdoms. The same thing with Spain. I'm in Spain right now because we're trying to do this trip to look into star forts. Mike, one of the experts from our group, 13th Monkey, he finds them all over the world. He's the leading expert in star fort indexing. He found them everywhere on the planet. And there's just too many of these snowflake forts all over the planet not to be interested in finding out what their similarities are. Some people have been trying to argue, okay, well, maybe making a star fort is a logical progression of humanity, but not like this. Not with 36 sides or 64 sides or 12 sides that have a different geometry to each one of them. They just fit into this supposedly Moorish style. But then we know, okay, so Spanish style, Moorish style, The Moors apparently got them from the Galatians. The Galatians then were supposed to be Greeks, and then they had slaves who were the Thracians. And the Thracians, we now know, by the way, no one pronounces TH as a th, the Barcelonans. Everybody else pronounces it t. So Tar, for the Taratians. And so there it goes back again to the Tarians. And it just seems like everywhere we look, there's the Tar people all over the planet, all over Europe, all over Asia, all over Africa, and North and South America. And so it's been biting us in the face, and we just keep looking for it.
No, it makes sense entirely that what we have is access to a timeline that has been historically hidden, but not disappeared in a traditional sense, but that the sequestration of information has changed things so that everything we've been taught through the university system has to be consistent to supporting a change that doesn't recognize the previous existence of this entire line of history. And so it's almost like you're playing the myth of Columbus out again and discovering a new world. But that myth of Columbus was given to us to believe in a story that just could not be true. There's no physical way to get from the Dark Ages into the Renaissance. But if there's 1,000 years that have just mysteriously been added to the calendar, now we don't have to get through the Dark Ages to the Renaissance. We can just go from the Jesus story in the beginning of Christianity into the fights over religion, but yet the fights over religion are constructed. There's a hall of all religions in Tartary, isn't there?
Well, part of the question about religion, well, I mean, gosh, there's so many things I just want to cover. First off, when you were talking a second ago about whether or not history is being hidden, I think we all admit that history is augmented. Everyone in school laughs about it. Like, oh, his story. And we're all expecting someday to get to her story or something. But then you've got this idea that augmenting history, out of mind, out of sight. So if you're actually doing this, you're talking about people that are able to manipulate like moments, even just this one, then it's going to take telling people that something's completely inside out and backwards in order for them to completely buy into it and then to lock themselves into that paradigm. But if you have so many people doing that, then you actually have people creating a new paradigm. I mean, if it's at least as big as the city or the city-state or the country or the world that they're living in is all, if you tear down nature and you build straight lines, and for a while then it's there. But if you're talking about Washington Irving, because of the Columbus myth, right? And I believe you could find a myth before him, but the Washington Irving myth is a very important one because it's the myth that introduces the the idea that everyone knew the world was flat and then it became round. He figured it out. And as much as everyone even knows that that's not a true story, we teach that in school at this point. There was Vikings, the Leif Erikson, in 1066 actually, I think is the year that they say. But they've set it up so that you can believe it, and you can't believe it if you know the truth, but you can at least laugh about it and see what they were hiding, what they were lying about. Because it actually becomes funny the way they do it. Right now I'm in Spain following, part of what I'm doing is following Washington Irving. He went, after he basically finished the Columbus story on the coast in New York, I think it was New York. Then he ended up in Spain and he followed his way to the Alhambra. And in Cordoba, he wrote this book called The Alhambra, where he's inside, right after Columbus, he's inside of the ruins of a castle, a tower, a Moorish castle that had fallen down in 1811 or 1812, which is a number that comes up a lot in the Tartaria thing, because 1812, at least according to the Gregorian calendar, is the year of, the War of 1812, the World War Zero. You got all of these, the Napoleonic Wars. You got the American Wars. You've got the earthquakes. You've got the burning of Moscow, which a stone city just caught fire. I mean, figure that one out. You got Caracas in Venezuela. everywhere you look on the planet, Vietnam collapsing. You'll just start noticing for yourself, because you'll find this to be the fan service inside joke, is how many places admit that they were destroyed around the whole world in 1811. But there were 260 days of fire falling from the sky. You know, it was like comets, meteorites, fire spider webs across the sky. The Mississippi River ran backwards for several weeks. You know, so it's a very, 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 very specific time. And then after that, the whole world shifts. And they say that there's this Krakatoa explosion, but when we look at the Krakatoa explosion, we don't really know, because all we have is his story from this guy who was in a lighthouse, supposedly underwater for 90 days, right? I think it was 30 to 90 days. Either way, a month underwater or 3 is crazy. And he got in a rowboat. He went over to the volcano, the biggest explosion in the world, was there only for a few minutes, and then he rowboat away down to his lighthouse, where he hid in a lighthouse, submerged by a tsunami, and then came to tell the tale later to, wouldn't you know it, his employers, the Dutch East Indies Company, who then after that owned everything and seceded from the Spanish crown, because they were the Dutch, but they were owned by the Spanish, who had been part of this Inquisition. So it all comes back to about 1600, 1300, 1066. These are the numbers which you mentioned something, Lenny. You called them nodes, and it seems like that's a thing. There are actual nodes for lifetime, or at least for periods of time that are beyond our lifetime, and they might have something to do with this octave bit 1 to 8, 64, 128, 512, 256. These numbers you see in computers, they actually relate and correspond pretty well to this idea of a hyperincarnation, where you look at each moment individually and it connects to itself through each other moment. So it wouldn't be a chronological moment. It would just be each person's moment that it relates to. Like a city, they would have a lifetime in a perpendicular array of lifetimes. They're all happening at the same time. And we're used to that. We're used to thinking about a city full of people with the same lifetime. But if we could imagine every single lifetime ever.
Something you just said struck me. What you just described is called the doubling function. 64, 128, 256, 512. That is a higher upper limit than Fibonacci almost instantly as soon as you start counting. But it becomes the lower upper limit around 10 billion to 100 billion, about 10 to the 8th. That's got to be the absolute distance that timelines express each other within fractals, so that a fractal that comes from a different place in time gets the same exact history to work through, but different characters playing the different roles, so that the things that have to occur always do occur, but the individual who happens to be in that role at the time has complete freedom of action to take it any way they want. So that the time that we're at now, hitting a wall that we're calling the 2012 wall of time, is a reality of getting back to the 0 point to be able to express on another different fractal scale, because the narrative ends. And because the narrative ends, we have an opportunity to change the ending of the narrative. And that is, in fact, what is happening, because what Tartaria has become is the key to that lock of opening up the block on time that is called 2012. We have to come together in exactly the form that we all as individuals have morphed into. And if we're in the form to take into the future, you die and you wake up and you're still in the same life and you can't go anywhere. but you can use time travel to go backwards and change the history to make it into something where we know the key events that didn't work that got things to this point. And so those events are changing in real time, which is the Mandela effect, because we live in a new time that hasn't been created yet, and that Tartary is the future past as opposed to the past future.
Yeah, and it's funny because the idea of creating a world as good as the Tartary is kind of subconsciously, everyone knows it. They're like, oh, the world used to be great, like the Atlantis myth, and the world will be great again, like Atlantis. You know, I mean, it's built into people, it's ingrained in people's consciousness. But you said something very, very Taoist, I think, which was like, I don't know how you phrase it. You can't step in the same river twice. Like, you cannot come back to this moment. You have to live in this moment now. And then you change the next moment. Whatever you end up in is not the same moment. It's another one. So I think we said something to the effect of someone has an epiphany, and now they're themselves in another reality because they've got it. With an epiphany, they're no longer themselves. And so this impact that we're having just by even talking about the subject to be really strong. Looking at that idea of Moore's law, looking at the doubling and then the idea of Moore's law, so we're hitting a curve and then things are getting smaller and it only can hit a certain level because there's only so much space for subatomic particles to lay flat to create these holographic projections of curves. If we didn't have this idea of incarnation, it would make more sense to say we have a hyper array of these threads that are functioning on Amdahl's principle. So it's like you can have a certain amount of, you can have 10 billion or whatever it is, but it's like, it's not time travel, it's like time bulking. It's like getting fat with time because you're connecting all these different moments. So you have you have to have a certain amount of time for calculation. One lifetime to be lived at least, but over and over again at once.
Yeah, well, what you're saying, Andreas, is like what quantum logic describes the past now being is just an information system.
Well,
it's
you've
not,
seen the Patingo
it's not
algorithm.
based on the arrow of time. It's based on information systems that we can go into and even edit at that level. Yeah.
Well, so there's this thing in Japan, the pachinko machine. It's like a not very fun to play version of a pinball table, but it's vertical, and you launch the ball and it just falls. I think what happened was after the war, they took some ball bearings and some leftover destroyed Mitsubishi 01 jets, and they took the scrap metal and they made this machine that does this algorithmic delineation where you drop the ball and then it falls over and over again as many ways as possible, kind of representing one universe. And you can only, it's like almost a divination tool as opposed to a video game. So like if you think about time travel, at least it's this idea that's being presented. It's like if you want to create a similar construct, you have to have a completely similar initial starting point that creates a bunch of atoms that have delineated out in the same way. So a lot of what people have thought about is this creation of between volcanoes and windmills, there's a lot of wind turbines around ruins and the heavy wind zone. It seems like there's something being done to put out energy rather than take energy in order to project a sort of a harmony in the zone, and it keeps that place from changing over a period of time. Because if you want to travel back before 2012, if you lock yourself before 2012, you might not get back to the same 2012, right?
Right.
So there's only so much you can go back before it starts changing everything, and you can't end up in the same present or something like it.
In fact, you can't move off this present and ever get back to it. So if you want to stay on this present, you always have to be in this present. As anytime you shift to a different present, you're once again, well, it goes with your theory of with my theory of consciousness. Everyone is in their own consciousness, and when we interact at the same consciousness frequency, it's like increasing the amplitude of the vibration, but remaining at the same frequency. And when we break up, we go into a frequency distribution pattern that is almost like a bell-shaped curve off the frequency that we assembled at. But the transference of frequencies and the way that we do it individually between humans, we are limited in our transfer of energy, in this case to voice. With video, we have a little more energy to give, but when we're person to person, that's the maximum energy for interchange between human particles. But the real way to transfer information is not human to human. It's human to book and book to human. And so what's written in the texts that we study and work on, as we put more time into making the picture clear, it develops as a sharper picture, more pixels. And so the general holograph is the same at every level, but who's got more pixels in their deck helps with the resolution. If time is an overlay and the only way to get out of your current time is to take a tangent and move to a different portion in history, it's a matter of which portion of history do you want to go to. And now going into Tartarian history is giving us a pathway into a linear future that isn't happening in the space future, isn't happening in the Armageddon future, and isn't happening in the non-player character future where people just go to their job and go home and don't think about anything.
Well, but I mean, okay, yeah, but meme magic, right? So if you think about controlling something and not having control, I imagine not having control feels a lot like a minor health for some people, whereas it's chaos for others. And maybe, and even the story you told earlier about He's So Fine and My Sweet Lord, like the Chieftain song,
Yep.
George Harrison, he bought, the story, right? Like that song did come first by like 6 years, and it was written by this dude who also knew Phil Spector, who produced both, and then he ended up buying. How did it end? He had to buy the Chieftain's production company in order to maintain the control of the imagery and to not get sued. He spent like $500,000 buying token records or whatever it was. I forget. But that still plays out over and over again as like this kind of dynamic Mandela effect, because in Quadrophenia, the Who, they use that song just, they use He's So Fine just because it was at the same time. And even the song itself, like it's got differences, but some of those differences are like influenced even by the fact that he just played, I think, in I don't remember if this is the same time, but I think he just did the Saturday Night Live. Was it 71 or was it 75? But like at some point he did like a lot of music with Phil Spector after the White Album. So of course there's going to be influences from each other, but who ends up controlling it? Well, the people like George Harrison, and what's the big difference is like he's singing about Krishna. So he's singing about like a longer term kind of delineation of order that's supposed to last, like a ritualistic order. So he ends up with the wealth necessary to control the meme, and then since then, like who remembers the Chieftains? I mean, like we do, I guess, but a lot of it's become more about him, which is he was like the quietest member of the Beatles. So it's interesting how much attention to what mattered, he was able to put into the aesthetic and then control it itself.
Yeah.
This conversation, Lenny, about time and you guys sharing, your understanding of it. All of a sudden, I had this idea to use the metaphor of iboga, the plant from West Africa, or the root from West Africa. If anybody's familiar with it, iboga is probably, from what I can understand, I've never done it, but it's the mother of all hallucinogenics. And what it does, but it's it's incredibly healing. But what they say, the iboga shamans say, This is the Iboga controls time.
Ibogaine? The Iboga from Ibogaine?
Yeah, Ibogaine. Iboga. Ibogaine is the derivative, but Iboga is the root. And
Is that different from ayahuasca?
Way.
Totally.
And this is what happens. I've sent two people. Well, Len and I have sent two people that were, on their way to death because of the downers that they were hooked on. What Iboga does for them and alcoholics and meth addicts and people that just want to discover themselves completely. That's what it does, because every one of the experiences, about 80% of them, maybe about 70, that I studied before I took these people to, I took one to Costa Rica and the other one to Canada. And because Iboga is legal in those two countries, it's absolutely forbidden here. And the reason why is because when you put someone under the, when they go through the treatment, you actually give them the Iboga. And for 3 days, they take certain amounts, and you start tripping, and you trip for 3 days. And in the trip, the most common effects are, first you go into a cartoon. You see cartoons for about 12 hours of all sorts of cartoons about your life in cartoon form. And then after that, you go into a rest period, and then all of a sudden the spirit of yourself, of your past, comes to you, and you go with your spirit of yourself, of your past, and go back to all the different places that you had trauma, as well as places that you had the best exhilarating experiences. And then the spirit just asks questions. What do you see? And the person gets to somehow re-edit it in their own minds, the way first they have to see it as it is, and then ultimately they re-edit it, and then the experience is complete. Because what the Iboga shows, and those spirits that come, because all three of them come, the spirit of Christmas past, present, and future of yourself. And you explain to yourself through a spirit that is you on a higher level, and you talk to yourself outside yourself in that realm. And when they come to, they don't go through any of the withdrawals. They don't go through the craving or any of that. But sometimes people have to do it twice. But it's an amazing idea to use the plant as a storyline to show us how you can heal your own timelines.
Does it work with a secondary, like IU takes like a secondary, plant to work with from like 1,000 miles away? Does Iboga need like a secondary? Can you use it just for like acacia or something, or how do you MAOI it?
Oh, you usually take it. Now, if you do it as the root and you're actually working with the shaman from West Africa, you have to go through a whole initiation. And that's
I tend not to recommend to people to take like psychedelic drugs, but if you want to like piss yourself and vomit for 3 days, like knock yourself out, it seems like it's pretty much way better than ayahuasca. As far as I can tell, there's a huge difference. All the people
what happens, this is what's so cool, because the guy that we sent to British Columbia, he came back, and this guy was on his way to death. He was on methadone, and his legs weren't working anymore, because what it does is it porosides the inside of your bones, and it just eats away everything. And so even if you get off of it, the damage is already done. And so he was ready to go, and we convinced the mother who had the money, and she really didn't want to do it. She said, "Why don't you just let him die?" It was really horrible. But the father went ahead and said, "No, we'll do it." And so when he came back, they were astounded, because he had a lazy eye since he was a child. I mean, he was born with it. It straightened out completely. He was a different human being. Absolutely. And he told us the whole experience. And then the other guy that we sent, he was an alcoholic. And he came back and he just loved everything because all he did was go down to, what do you call those things that they hook the trees that you just slide down on the rope? What is that? Yeah, the zip line. After he got free, all he did was zip line in the jungle, and that's all he talked about. Didn't drink a thing.
Yeah, I've seen so many people get off of opiates through it. It makes sense it's illegal. But especially interesting is its ability to deal with methadone, because that's like opiates with Terminator DNA and chalk. Just really screws you up. So it's incredible that it can rewire your brain. They think that it helps with Alzheimer's. There's like some research being done specifically with iboga's lower analogs that Shulgin worked on, some of the chlorine and the DOs, I think, and some of the QCs. DOs specifically, they'll do like a full put people into a coma, and then they'll give them, that way they don't feel it. They've done this like John Hopkins, of course. They don't like people to feel nice thing. But afterwards, when they wake up, their brain worked again, which is unusual for, I think, most humans in general. So it's a pretty incredible substance. But, again, with the whole being careful about anything psychoactive could be associated with the spirit. And, I still believe in those, so I'm kind of careful.
Yeah, they're really powerful. And this, you've got to kind of have a physical. They want you to have a physical before you go because your blood pressure. There's two things you can't do. You can't take any kind of Taoistic medicines or herbs because they'll counteract with the iboga. And the other thing is,
cigarette even will have an monoamine oxide inhibitor. So it could be the difference between, heaven and hell, let's say. Like that can make the envelope, the melatonin last a lot longer or initiate a lot harder into your bloodstream.
Yeah, that's just like when Terence McKenna found out when he went. Did you hear the story when he went to Madagascar and he ate the bark that the shaman said that you would rise and you would go to heaven and talk to the gods and all that. So his brother did it, but all they found out was that they were sick for 2 weeks, so sick that they wanted to die. And then once they came to, they were so happy that they had lived through it that they said, well, why do you think this was called a psychedelic? They asked the shaman, and he goes, well, don't you feel better? You almost died. Now you're better. And it's kind of that thing that you got to know what you're dealing with. And in their perspective, that was being raised from the dead. But he didn't understand that.
That's another weird thing about I don't want to just segue back to the Tartary based on that reminds me of Tartary rather. But the word Tartarus is used to describe death. And so the other aspect of this was are we leading people towards this Hades realm or something like that? And it seems like that's one of the other reasons I'm so scared of. I mean, I'm not scared is the word, but psychedelics doesn't seem like the answer all the time. Gosh, right now I cannot be doing this call, but I'm driving across Starforts, the city. I'm driving through all these roundabouts. It requires a certain amount of sobriety, and I can see why if you're you're about to die from taking the wrong substances already, then you need to change. That's the right kind of medicine. It's one that requires you to take it once and never again. So I like that. But in general, I think people are missing kind of the original psychedelic, or mystical might be a cooler word to describe consciousness and sobriety, because it's such a trip. And in general, life feels, the more sober I am, like it's in limbo between the metaphysical and the surreal. You've got all these people that are constantly doing things that just don't make sense. You get all of these mystical synchronicities happening all the time. And it's maybe, maybe people have just dulled their senses so much that they can't feel them unless they have a huge decalcification of their pineal gland. But also, isn't that, leading us to being more susceptible to being more, to things in general? And maybe we're supposed to remain a certain level of skeptical. I mean, because otherwise, how are we supposed to find out what's true about history or about what's really going on? But, I can't disagree that it's the perfect use for, someone has methadone. stop. Don't. I don't know what to say. Do something else. Try anything. This sounds 3 days like freaking out, thinking for a cartoon, better than a lifetime of methadone. So agreed.
There's a lot to be said in the realm of psychedelics for different things. And when I had my college experience from 1976 to 1980, I was heavily into testing the drug culture. It was 10 years after the 1960s, and drugs at this time were not readily available, but on college campuses throughout the nation, a good 60% of the campuses had people experimenting with drugs, and the other 40% were narrow channel minded, just do it and do it type of things. So I experimented with a lot of the different drugs, quickly realized that I didn't like the physiological experience of most of them, including anything that fell into the category of uppers or downers, but could deal with the hallucinogens, the magic mushrooms, the LSD, and that sort of stuff. So my senior year, before I was about to graduate, I had an experience where the campus received Quaaludes, but the Quaaludes were actually PCP, a notorious hallucinogen
That's how
that
it gets
is
you.
not something that anyone would want to take, but the whole campus drug world got dosed in this stuff. And while I wasn't caught on it, I was one of the few people on campus who could relate to people who were on it and also relate to people who weren't on it. And it
What
was
year was
one of
this
those,
again?
pardon?
What year was this again?
1980.
Okay, cool. Keep going.
And
Lenny,
so,
I took the same stuff. I had the same stuff in 1980.
The
interesting.
government. There's a great Freedom of Information paperwork about this because, and by the end of the 70s, they were pushing against. They were like, okay, Operation Shut It Down, and you can really check it out. You look at the. I'm one of those guys who says he reads Playboys for the articles, but I guess I'm serious because I literally downloaded Playboys from 1967, 68, 70s, 80s for the articles, also for the advertisements. And you'll notice a drug called Romular. So first you'll see all these, coked out, first alcoholic ladies in the 40s, then there's coked out ladies in the 50s, speed freaks in the late 50s into the 60s. About 65, 66, you start seeing a certain amount of research going on, and then by 66, 67, 68, especially, it's LSD. And then you've got Quaaludes, but the Quaaludes are more fun. They go better with things for the most part. So by the end of it, you need a dissociative to come down, because otherwise you're going to have all these heroin addict models like DG. So they end up with this non-addictive substitute for codeine that they called it. It wasn't just black kids in Harlem or Washington, D.C. making PCP. It was, of course, the agency that invented these crazy things for the help of LaRoche, and then give it to the kids and have them screw up the inner cities with it. But PCP was supposed to be the Operation Come Down, because it was supposed to be that you take this stuff, go into it for a few days, and come out of it pretty decent. The problem was then it was ended up in the hands of everybody because it was such a great weapon. So, but it was a very big, in terms of whose favorite it was. It seems like John C. Lilly, who invented LSD-25, he liked it a lot, and he liked to give it to dolphins with DMT for their echo communication. He thought that they would echolocation of the psychedelic realms with it. And, at least enough so that the government gave him money for it. One of the videos we have actually is all about that. If you look up like psychedelic dolphins, pretty sure we're at the top of the list. But there is some amount of use for dissociatives too. In terms of classes of psychoactive substances or phenurothymic substances, as Aldous Huxley referred to them, spirit awakening agents. There's dissociatives. There's stimulants, which I feel the same way, buddy. Not useful and they make me cry. But there's also there's delirium, And the drug that really, this is one reason I'm so not super excited about taking drugs all the time, because the number one drug everyone takes on the planet, the first drug investigated and invested in studying was scopolamine, not LSD yet, not morphine. They thought morphine and codeine were useful because of the withdrawal symptoms. Get people withdrawing and they go, oh, you're suffering? Do what we want. But with scopolamine, it was just so much easier. And that's the devil's breath. That if you've seen the documentary, they blow it in your face in South America and they get you to give them all of your stuff. You hand it to them, you go home and you clean out your apartment and you bring it to their car and you're like, thanks, bye. You wake up the next day and you don't remember. You're like, whoa, I really did that? Seriously? So yeah, scopolamine, look into it. It's a delirium. It's the witches, the Slavic Christian witches used in bellflowers and angel trumpets. I think Rapunzel is all about a pregnant woman going and looking for some angel trumpets to help her with her digestion issues, because it will make you go away if you take a small amount. And a little bit more, you'll start believing everything you're told. So I'm always concerned about scopolamine because people don't even know they're taking it. You're like, wait a second, I'm on it? Yeah, I'm saying that probably. Like, when was the last time you had potatoes, tomatoes, tobacco, eggplant, chili pepper, any of that stuff ever? And it probably is today. And you'll notice, how long ago was the pepper picked, or how long ago was the tomato picked? Well, it was picked pretty much when it was green, so they could ship it. So by the time you get it, it's already got, a green thing is trying to protect itself from being picked early, right? So by the time it's red from being shipped to you, it's got so much scopolamine in it, and you're eating potatoes coated in ketchup, smoking a cigarette. And you see that's about the time America with McDonald's and all the fast food with all the nightshades and the cigarettes, you start changing the billboard from the 4 out of 5 doctors have found this to be practical to I like Ike, and all these I statements. Believe in what you're told and we'll buy into it and we'll sell it. And so I think that's another issue that needs to be addressed when we're talking about psychedelics or any psychoactive phenothymic substance. And why they say psychedelics instead of phenothymic? Because I think it was the bear, the governor of Alabama's grandson, Aldous Huxley's friend, Owsley, right? Owsley the bear. What's his name?
Owsley? I know that name. I know the story of the Merry Pranksters. And
so Owsley's grandfather was the governor. The only reason he could make all those substances people. So Shulgin, he got off the boat after the war. He was World War II, a Navy officer at the age of 15. He graduated from Yale. He got in a submarine or something like that to keep safe. Didn't want him to hurt his little brain. And he gets out after reading a textbook on chemicals. And, I think DuPont picks him up and says, do it. Do whatever you want. Make nail pesticides that work. And we'll say that they do because they do. What do you want to do next? He's like, let's isolate molecules in the mescaline cactus. We have terrible antidepressants. I bet you would make better. Like, go. Just do it. Shut up and take my money. And he does it. But afterwards, someone has to give those to rats. And how do you ask rats if they're depressed to begin with, let alone after they've taken the substance? So he ends up taking it himself. And then he meets up with Owsley. And Owsley's really bringing this stuff, the cousins to the sheriffs. The cousins of Nottingham's men are Hell's Angels. Hell's Angels were bringing this stuff all around to all the concerts. Attention, there's some bad brown acid circulating Woodstock. That's STP, Strength, Tranquility, and Presence. The Merry Pranksters, the whole thing. But that actually came from Shulgin, who made DOM, 2-5-dimethoxy-4 methylphenolphthaleamine, right? And that chemical was a 36-hour psychedelic that's very closely related to the Bogada, but it's methylated, so it's like a methylene envelope, and it really messed up a lot of people who didn't know what they were expecting, because it wasn't psychedelic like Owsley had said. He's like, what do you say? To feel like a demon or to store angelic. Try a new psychedelic. Something like that is what his response to Aldous Huxley's, phenothyme was, which was like, the phenothyme means it's less to do with your own psyche. It has more to do with the outer spirit, and the outer awarenesses that we're connected with, right? So they want to downplay that as much as possible and say, oh, it's all in your head. You need to be in control of your trip. But they haven't given anyone the tools to work with their own imagination to begin with in the conscious realm, which is like, so to throw yourself into the subconscious realm, and especially with the delirium, which makes you not just be like, whoa, man, I'm tripping out, but you're like, yeah, this guy is blue and everything is, round and I believe it, or this guy is purple and everything's flat and I believe it, or whatever the situation is for you, you just believe it and you don't even think it's weird. That's the kind of thing that they project it for. So, I mean, it's got to be one of those things where you have to be very careful to be as sober minded as possible and to understand what that metric is before you throw yourself into the altered state. Otherwise, like what it seems like is it's a message. And like that's also what the Merry Pranksters Ken Kesey said. Like when you get the message, hang up the phone, and just go out and do the mission.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm able to reconstruct things that happened. The idea that PCP would be given bulk under the form of Quaaludes to a college campus just totally reeks of a test operation where unwitting subjects were suddenly subjected to an experiment and they could follow the results of the experiment down the line. I have an idea, but I'm not going to mention it on the radio because I know the instant it gets mentioned, it gets out. But there's something about the Freedom of Information Act and the information that you just gave us, Andreas, that tells me that there's way more to the backstory of what I went through than what I might have imagined unless I used imagination. And the net of the PCP story was that I was thinking I was Jesus at the time, helping to save people by getting them from the drug culture to the folks who could download them and help them as individuals. So I was really a conduit in the game, but when it came my turn to be sucked into the game, I wanted no part of it and ended up in a mental hospital by my own volition because I was afraid of the people who were working me to get to other people because I could see what was going on, but it was such a critical thing to do what I did that it scared the heck out of me. And instead of staying, I ran and left. And because I did and never got debriefed and taken back, the way that I've looked at hallucinogens through the following 30 years of my life gives me a whole cool perspective entirely different from the one I had before this conversation, because I always treated that as something different from the conscious levels I was on. But the stories that between you and Miles have been told just here today are so close to things that I've experienced in the first hand by doing this stuff that I think that the morphology of human is giving more people this type of experience, but how we deal with it and what we do with it is what matters. And I think you're totally right in the idea that you don't want to go on a psychedelic experience until you have the mental mindset of control of yourself so that you can experience the experience and not bring your subconscious into the world and create new problems for yourself.
I agree. I think it's really interesting, in retrospect about what you said. I think a lot of people could say, they could look at their own lives the way you do and look at it from a wider view than just from their own head at the time. The way it is, in the past and the present, like, oh wow, that was totally some sort of an operation. And and then maybe it's not just such an interesting coincidence. It's more of it could be a synchronicity, it could be a coincidence, but it's a correlation at least. I'm not
Oh,
saying it's necessarily the worst thing, but it's something to be considering, is all of the ways that we're tied to each other, not just through time, space, but through emotion and through our own moments. So,
Andreas, when you said it's an operation, and when Lenny said the thing about the Quaaludes in 1980, what happened for us, I just realized too, by you saying an operation, where I was in Lawton, Oklahoma, one of the biggest artillery military bases in the world is Fort Sill. And we would get an array of drugs that we never knew how, the dealers and stuff. And, I used to deal pot, and sometimes acid, but the other dealers that were around, I never could really understand who the people were that would give it to me, that they got it from, because they would never, usually people go, yeah, this guy, they would never do that. And the Mexican and those Quaaludes were PCP laced, or they were PCP, and that was true. We were all at a party, kind of in an early rave, if you want to call it that, in 1980, and everybody flipped out. So that's amazing, Lenny, that you bring that up.
And PCP has become more popular. PCP ketamine, which is a type of PCP. I forget if it's 2-oxo or 3-MCE. There's a bunch of different things there. I'm more of a chemist than a remember of all of which ones are, though. They're okay. So ketamine has become licensed as a nasal spray for antidepression and anxiety, at least in California and a couple other states now. And ketamine and PCP are very popular, like 3-MeOs and all the different kinds that are available. The one that was not super evil, I think, was the Israeli guy who had a phantom limb pain. His wrist had been removed, invented for his own personal use, and open sourced the designs and made it free so anyone could make it themselves. So obviously no one in the pharmaceutical industry is going to look into it. Was methamphetamine. And it's been pretty well disappeared. You can't find it anymore. But in 2011, I think there was a lot of tests being done that showed it as being somehow a more positive use of the thing that wasn't so psychosis-y, right? And that seems like a big part of the problem with it. But they moved away from that as soon as possible. And, you're at that time where you can find it's harder now, but at the time you could figure out, basically looking at what that stuff, if anyone was a collector, you could take some of that stuff and see how much formaldehyde's in it, how much of the pre-base parabens that they use basically make the same xenoestrogen plastics that make formaldehydes out of similar to aspartame, And probably, don't quote me, but I wouldn't be surprised if aspartame came out of this as an accident making PCP. It's a weird subsequent chemical response to making cyclohexamine. You get aspartame. So that at room temperature becomes formaldehyde. So and it only came out, after that. So now it's in our sugar.
There's a lot of interesting chemistry real deep here. And for those folks who don't know chemistry, sorry about the jargon, but I'm a trained chemist in inorganic chemistry. And if you've got a background in organic chemistry, I think we can deconstruct just about anything chemical in nature.
Yeah, I just want to make sure when anybody, I like to scare people a little bit, maybe my bad. But looking into things before, don't take something that someone tells you is called acid. Figure out what chemical it is. Also, go check out, we have this book on the TartaryNova.com. If you get into our Foundry, I'll send you a link to it. It's really easy. We have a link to a book I recommend on the subject. If you want to feel more paranoid about substances and their connection to operations, Acid Dreams. and it's free. We got a copy of it that you can get, and it's really important. It starts out with the Soviet Union testing on the Czech Republic. They checked on the Czech Republic, the Czechoslovakia. Slovakia is kind of a backwater, let's say, to Prague. So, but in Prague, where they have the best universities, that's where they decided to test out these little hammer and sickle shaped versions of LSD. And they got a lot of really interesting, wild and crazy guys out of the experiment, right? But then they ended up sending them, they opened the borders in 1971 or 75, and they let them all out into, I think after 68, because of the revolution, they opened the borders and said, get out, just get out. And they sent all the people that they could out of the Czech Republic to anywhere, all these acid head refugees, LSD refugees, and Soviet hammer and sickle LSD refugees. But the ones that stayed, there was a lot of self-immolation, a lot of like burning themselves. Crazy amount of that happened in the Czech Republic because they didn't know what to do because they were so disconnected and divorced from the culture that was going to be accepted after that. So check out Acid Dreams, But I think let's shift maybe from this subject, history or future.
There's a lot to be said about what we get by putting together information from different perspectives. I will definitely have to go deeper into what is written about the times. It's a strange position to be in a place where I lived history for most of the people in the world now. As somebody who just crossed 60 within the last couple years, I have an impression of the world that was created from the 1960s and 70s. And now that stuff is historical and is changing in the minds of what actually happened, I see how the narrative of society is impressing on the individual narrative, and the individual narrative presses back against the narrative of society. And the Mandela effect, which didn't make sense in a literal form, can easily be explained now as setting up a mechanism to get from a past that is more that can be looked at as upstream to a future that's looked at as downstream, to change something that happened in a past that's morphable. And so I think that the idea of having multiple worlds in smaller and smaller dimension is something that is hard to grasp until you actually start writing out the numbers in the Fibonacci sequence and start seeing how fast they grow. Because the growth rate of anything that's new is a trajectory of a projection. And the more legs something's going to get, it happens because of people being interested, not because of people being forced to do something. And so as individuals, it's implicit amongst us to take what we know and verify it. And if we have perspectives that the time we've spent can verify things from other folks, we need to go into isolation almost and work those perspectives to the point where when they're shared together, we can look at overlaps and disagreements and almost have a scry into what portions they made up and what really is true. But I don't think it's a they that made up so much as a morphology of growth that follows in the Fibonacci sequence that says that when you move to a new fractal, 50% self-similarity of the old fractal but that self-similarity is morphed over time. So if the time period we're dealing with is a 26,000 year cycle and it just passed to a new cycle, well, it takes 26 years to make just 100th% and that's way, way lower than the threshold of error. And so since we're in the event, we have trouble having perspective on the event, but the event comes from a 0 point energy so that all bets are off. And in 13,000 years, we'll have made 50% of the blend. That's a long time period. Nothing we do now is going to be of any significance there if we do things right. But if we do things wrong and embed things in our belief system that aren't true and can't be true, we would put off the future cultures from understanding at the point of what we're understanding now as we reach that node of 2012, which has to be plus or minus 56 years, 28 in either direction. So that takes us to the cosmic convergence in the 1980s and should end the period sometime mid-2030s. And I just did scientific calculation on the fly on the radio. Might be a first for any radio on the fly to be doing science live on air. But
I was just thinking you're pretty much the best at. I mean, I don't know if I want to push you that direction, but it sounds like you understand why and McKenna metatime and Terence McKenna's metatime idea. Something that it seems to play. It baffles a lot of people that's involved in the new history movement because they're trying to understand things in a very short period of time. But something you also said earlier is this idea of time not as as a metric, but as a distance or some other kind of a metric than as different. Calling it different moments like that makes it much more convenient to look at 13,000 of these dog years, right, from the Sirius dog star, as opposed to from our main soul that we're primarily driven by in this particular shared coherence. If we start kind of looking at that, then all of a sudden everything about our time space becomes cyclical in those nodes that you've been measuring. And those nodes pretty much, if you go out somewhere like where there's a 1,000-year-old ruin or something like that, either it's there or it isn't, right? Except, like you said, you can decrypt stuff. So that becomes interesting because there's stuff that's designed to be modulated on purpose. You have a story where the fundamental parts are not the cover of the book. So people can keep changing those aspects, the characters that play the parts or whatever. It could become, a black male or a young white girl, or, it could be a transgendered robot. It really doesn't matter so much to the fundamental pathos, and so maybe there's something to that they're trying to decrypt and encrypt information in history so that it will last, or that things won't, based on them being, so important right now that they have to, people have to put their own spins on them, so they end up being changed, or they're not that noticed. Only the people that notice them forever are able to hand them down every century or so.
Yeah, and the loss of family as a unit has really, really buckled the flow of information amongst the people. And at the same time, the sequestration of information into the mill industrial corporate complex is such that individuals who don't have a Renaissance education don't see the depth of the ties between different things. But everything is made to stand alone in its own little box and cubicle, so that when you're immersed in that cubicle, you can get through the entire cubicle without a problem. But once you try and take that cubicle and put it in another cubicle, it becomes different, and you get to a border periphery where if you can't make change, you can't advance any further. And I think that it's almost like a series of Russian dolls, the way that fractals work, but that humans are expressed on different size worlds based on frequency. And so whatever frequency you're resonating at, here where we are collected together in the New Way radio show, we're resonating at a somewhat grounded frequency that's able to have cohesion at an amplitude that grows based on how much the audience is involved in the show. And when we get to places where the audience is attracted to listening to the show because the views of the people on the show are different than what they're getting, each person who's at this wavelength now will go through a period of trying to make sense of what they heard, and will hear something completely different when they replay the show. But depending on which timeline they're setting on, the different versions of the show are happening on different timelines, because there's a timeline that hasn't made the discovery of Tartaria that would have no functional hook to even find the show. Miles, you had something to say?
Yeah, on the topic of family and the disintegration of communal living because of where we are now, I want to bring it back to either Mike or Andreas to talk about the newest discoveries about the foundlings and the psychic break that happened that we're thinking about with the mud floods, and how a bunch of children all of a sudden had to become little slaves. And they might be our forefathers, and they were up to the fourth generation. So can somebody talk about that, Mike or Andreas, and how that affects our lives as far as, our families and our mother and her mother, and you see what I'm saying?
I see Andreas trying to talk, and I'm not hearing his voice. Oh, his
No,
mic is off.
I was just trying to make sure that I felt like I got disconnected. Sorry, in the middle of Spain, 5G coverage is spotty at best, but it is everywhere, we're noticing. We found our little 5G nook here. They say there's not 5G in the great nation of Europe, but they're not telling you the truth. It's a pilot program in every major city. So you might find bad signal in between some of the cities, but once you get to the cities, there they are. Like right now we're in Zaragoza, which is like Zar in Spain, Aragon. And yeah, the signal here is just, it's incredible once you get to the top of the hill where they have the 5G tower at, in front of the 11th century castle with a ton of windmills next to it. So, but if you go just anywhere in any direction away from it, like then you'll find some disconnection until you get to Madrid or Valencia or any of the other more Spanish southern cities.
Mike, are you here? Do you want to log in and answer Miles's question?
I'm not all too familiar with the topic of the foundling trains. I think Andreas can help you a lot better there.
Oh yeah, I didn't hear that. Sorry for the disconnection. So Miles, what was your question about foundry trains, foundling?
I just wanted to, because of some of the conversations we had yesterday with Margaret and some other people and Wendy about, they were talking about their mothers and their issues with their mothers and people and, their families and stuff. And I've kind of started connecting the idea of the foundlings to, of course, there was a psychic break from family, as Lenny had mentioned earlier. And And then we find these foundlings in the foundling trains and how that's affected our culture psychologically and our roots. And could you share with the people about the foundlings and everything?
Yeah, man, that's a heavy subject. That's our own Tartarian, I don't think we can use the H word here. But what ended up happening is a bunch of kids were found on trains in the 1800s and ended up doing work the bidding of the laborers. The official story isn't any much better. It's that they were the product of a society without any sort of women's rights. And so the children ended up being born in out of wedlock or in wedlock, really doesn't matter. If anyone doesn't want to take care of the kids, you just drop them off after birth at the hospital. You just leave them there, and then they're taken away. You don't usually have a choice if you're not able to take care of the child, by the way. Like, it's basically like you earn the right to keep it, kind of a society. And that's again, this is official history. So people go in, they have a kid, they decide that you don't deserve the kid. They either tell you or don't tell you when they take it from you that it died or that they just took it from you. You know what I mean? And they say, show me, and you say, show me, and they say, no. You can't see it. It's going to be buried right away or something like that. So a lot of people didn't know this, and you'll find this in the 70s and the 80s happening in Argentina. I went down to Argentina, lived there for like a year and a half, meeting people that have been a victim to this. Either it's the parent generation, which is like devastating, or because they weren't part of the military inter-party, so the military inter-party need kids, give them kids. But you go back to the 1830s, all of a sudden there's just this huge wave of kids, maybe 30,000 out of each zone at a time, and there's millions of kids, maybe like 30 million kids in total. I forget the number exactly right off the top of my head because just tragic stuff that, I'd rather not think about all the time, but it could very well be that the entirety of the former population of this nation had all of their able-bodied men killed. That's one of the theories. It could also be, the number of these diseases. That's the official story also, that there's diseases that kill and there's all these orphans. But for whatever reason, out of Russia, immigrating, you have kids coming to Canada, kids coming to England, kids from South America or from Russia or from New Zealand, from Australia, all of these orphanages. And then they end up, how do you get places back then, right? Well, we get them there on the only mode of transportation that makes any sense. And in fact, there's trains all over the world connected to each other. You could get basically from Moscow to Shanghai or to Berkeley. You get one way or the other on a train across the planet, no problem back then. It's insane that it was possible, but you could do it. And so these kids are being brought from all over the world, from one place to another, and being dropped off somewhere else from a place where their parents' language was. And then you've got these signs saying, okay, after the World's Fair happening here, and we'll get into World's Fairs, by the way, because they're very important to the Tartaria thing. Let's just show off future past, right? With all of these gods and statues of gods from another culture than our own, right? Well, after these we're going to have some trains show up. And the trains, they're going to drop, first the Wells Fargo wagons come in, and after that, you're going to get your own boy and girl. Just come on out, pick one out, pick two out, pick 3 or 4 or 5. You know what? There's so many kids. Why don't you start an orphanage of your own? And then you've got these schools, these orphanage schools, these foundries for the found, the lost and the found. All orphan kids, one reason or another. Some of them, for sure, the parents couldn't take care of them, and there was an infrastructure for it, so they got thrown into it. And I've seen that happen to kids. I mean, I didn't see it firsthand, but I've learned about people like Henry Darger, who wrote the longest book in history, as far as I know it. And, it's got everything from illustrations to the stories of a war, of a matriarchy with little girl princesses, kind of like, Star Wars has a thing with Princess Amidala who becomes the senator. The idea of a planet run by the children, the young girl, even. The youngest runs it for a while. It's predated in the realms of the unreal quite a bit. And in fact, they talk about this in Baalbek and in a number of cultures, this idea of a king for a day and a princess for a period, right? For 7 years, I think it is, 3 to 7. But the Foundry then has, a bunch of kids showing up. They're like, you wanna run the machines? You got these kids, they'll run the machines. The weird thing is, these machines, which are really going to be run right now by like Cambodian kids, right? Or it used to be by like Chinese and Japanese people that were shorter before they started changing the diets of people. That's like the story, right? We had short dwarves all over the planet, and now we have hormonal HGH injected in our food. But there were giants and there were dwarves. And it sounds kind of gnarly, but if you think about it, they're kind of crazy, but there are examples of very, very tall and very, very short people even today. But back then it was more. And the dwarves, the dwarves running these machines, sounds like this infrastructure already existed and needed to be run by small people. So you have these wagons and these mining systems, and where are you going to go? You need people to go into these caves. Africans didn't do very well in the Rhodesian caves at being 2 meters tall. You needed people that were very small to do this. England, with its coal mines, is notorious for beginning the child labor laws. All of this comes after Foundry. But also what comes after is finding out people like the police chief of Belgium, Mr. BRIO, or the president of this or the emperor of that was actually the foundling adopted son or daughter, but usually son, or just a kid at the orphanage who ended up inheriting this major position. And it could be for a lot of reasons. It could be, a major wave of infertility spread through Europe. A lot of the time associated with measles, mumps, tuberculosis, etc., or even vaccinations of them after 1919. But they could be associated with the plague, or they could be associated with radiation or some sort of something else. I mean, who's to say what exists and what's real? But there's a great example of people with the inability to have kids and a number of other kids, so many of them, they were displaced. And when you start finding out who was the foundling, who's famous, it might surprise you how many people were not officially from royal descent. I mean, I don't want to do the Game of Lame or whatever you call the Game of Thrones. I feel like the only spoiler is the finale wasn't very good. But as far as I can tell, the bastard prince is, as cliche as it gets for this modern post-foundling, speculative, free Masonic reality that we live in. They always say it's a self-made man because they're trying to escape their own Oedipus complex. And so they want to think, okay, well, this guy worked really hard to earn the guitar that my father gave me. So that gets it. And I'm going to give him it instead of my own son. And that plays out over and over again in Sir Francis Bacon mythology, from Shakespeare to Banksy as Prince William, right, or Prince Harry. Every time you look at it, they're saying, we don't want to be thought of. I don't know if you've heard that, right? I don't know if anyone, you know that Prince Harry is Banksy. I think he's self-admitted at this point. But like, he doesn't want to be known as. He's not allowed to be. It's not a culturally acceptable thing, So keep it a DL, I guess. But that's what Shakespeare was. Shakespeare was a royal that couldn't admit it, right? So, how many of these examples of foundlings are just the perfect place for let's say you're a really aristocratic person, you're not allowed to have a job. Beatrice Potter had a lot of trouble marrying her husband because he was a doctor and he worked with his hands. Her family weren't okay with that. There's some people that are classist in ways that I think is beyond what most, at least Americans, can understand. So there is examples of people that are like, let's give them all of this work that I did, put it in their name. I don't think Shakespeare literally could write. I think he was illiterate, right? It's the story. And yet he was able to pen all these amazing Danish plays and French plays that in their own language. It was just a lyrical genius, as if he'd been educated or something, like a aristocrat. So, or maybe it was a dozen ghostwriters, kind of a thing. So I think the Foundry, we use it as a metaphor at TartaryNova.com, also for everyone here who has so much information. Like you come from yourself in this world and your own memories. Nothing really exists before you decided to put it there except for God. So everything else is just kind of the creation. And if someone has a lot of pretense, like, oh wow, I know this because I'm an educated person. Charles Dawkins told me this firsthand. You know, I mean, it's like, okay, but really the coolest people in history so far that we can tell, a lot of them are just these supposed members of the Foundry movement. And, you know, I don't know. So it's a blessing and a curse. And it sounds really tragic when you think about how many people were orphaned and forced into crazy labor. But when you start finding out, I mean, I've been turned around a lot, the beauty of it. All of these people like Henry Darger and their creative lives and what they've been through, it actually seems more beautiful a Dharma than it did to begin with. So I don't know, but that's what I got on the Foundry.
Yeah, the story of William Shakespeare and Francis Bacon. You think Francis Bacon was the coordinator of things under the Shakespeare name?
Man, I'm such a fan of that theory. It's crazy, but I guess that's my bias. I've heard it enough times over the years.
Amen. I believe it too. I've studied this.
There's a movie a while ago where they make it the niece or nephew. I think they said it was a nephew of the Queen. Well, I doubt it. I find that dubious. I think that he might have penned a few of them, but you know how it is. I think that movie is trying to initiate the next wave of people understanding. Yes, Shakespeare was hidden by yes, the CIA, right, Facebook and New York Times. You know, yes, the Queen and royal family are influencing the media. You know, of course they did in the 1600s. Why the heck would the world stage is round? You know, I mean, like at a certain point, it's obvious. You start looking into what's going on now, and that's where it becomes daunting to people. It's like, okay, if you can't believe that the modern world is full of, I think when it was Dick Cheney said, the newspaper, the New York Times said this, but it was a quote that he'd said. He's re-quoting himself. It's a very Trumpian move, right? You look at Sir Francis Bacon and you look at Prince Harry and you say, okay, how can they be creating art? Well, how can they be human? How can they even be, you know what I mean? Like, but if they're creating art, what's it for? And is there some sort of it's some sort of a greater good? Well, all they believe in is this philosophy that they have to be taught all their lives. So, you know, in terms of Shakespeare, though, and yes, I'm pretty convinced it was either written by mostly or coordinated, because I think it would have been easy for him to get some coordination. And, you know, George Lucas didn't have to write a lot. Like, he was able to get
Sure. No, it makes total sense that Shakespeare is as much a character in the day as Albert Einstein is in today's day, where every myth in the world is associated with Einstein and his theory of relativity. And what most people don't get is that Einstein was a patent clerk and had access to other people's knowledge. He wasn't a scientist creating his own knowledge. It all came out of his imagination, and imagination is more important than knowledge, which is what he set up right before he explained space-time. So the limits of space-time...
Right, because his girlfriend was... I heard his girlfriend gave him a lot of the knowledge, so that's pretty funny. You might, you know...
Maliva, and yeah, she was actually his first wife. And one of the major disagreements that broke up the partnership between them was she was educated better than he was, and he was taking the credit and not sharing with her, which again is an enforcement of the Women Don't Have Rights Act that was created by the Foundry movement. And so it makes sense that something in history that we can advance to is that 80 years after Shakespeare had his reign of creating all this mythical fiction that rewrote what history is now taken as, we had Isaac Newton make some serious decisions about creating science and teasing it away from religion. And Bacon is between those areas. Newton was horrified when they put Galileo to death for suggesting that the Earth might orbit the sun rather than the sun orbiting the Earth. And this is all accepted current myth. So how much of it is true or not is not of question here. It's just a matter that I'm repeating the myth as I know it. And so when Galileo was put to death, Newton realized that if he wanted to consider science, he had to deal with a king who is monomaniacal and a pope who is monomaniacal and get them to agree on a distribution of the resource to stop the upcoming war that was going to happen between the Republicans and the Democrats of the day. And so the construct of science to be based on inanimate objects and totally dead stuff while life belonged to the Pope was the basis set for changing the reality that avoided the wars of 1700. And the avoidance of the wars of 1700 allowed the wars of the 1780s, the American and French Revolution, to be much, much greater than they would have if there had been 80-year wars blocking time. But there wasn't war back then because there was Tartaria back then, and we're just trying to overlay the fictional history onto the Tartarian history. So when Newton created the death culture by taking all life out of science, science quickly assumed biology 80 years later, created this another phantom of history named Darwin, and convinced people of things that just weren't true. And off we went into these scientific realms, and because they believed in it, they made it true. And so it rewrote a narrative that, based on something not true, we got from there to here, and it's really not true now. But we're caught in that narrative until we start writing our own narratives.
I think that the 80 Years' War thing, I keep wondering more about all the time, man. The iconoclasm of the 80 Years' War is so huge, from Marx to the beginning of the Stalin after Lenin, and the 80 Years' War, the official one of the iconoclasm, the Dutch were separating from Spanish, but also the 80 Years' War of the Habsburg when they were, Black Germany and, Afro-Germain. And then there's it seems like 80 Years' War keeps cycling from 1811 to 1890, and, standing in front of a grave from the ransom, 1799. Seems like everywhere you go, there's an 80 Years' War. I don't know. But also, maybe that's the amount of time it takes, a lifetime or something, half a lifetime, or a lifetime, and was it two-thirds of a life? I think it was about two-thirds of a lifetime, right?
No, I'd call it a normalized lifetime. And the reason I call it a normalized lifetime is because 80 years is the scale of human life, but in reality, how you experience your 80 years might be on the scale of 26,000, like I'm on. And so the perspective that you take to each life really depends on how this life really works. And I'm at the point where the idea of life and death as we know it is out the window, because my consciousness is always going to survive. And if it dies in this meat popsicle, there's how many parallel realities that I could potentially be conscious in. But for some reason, we can only be conscious in a single reality unto ourselves at the same time. So my concept of timelines is set up to allow other consciousnesses in different realities that are further off in the Fibonacci sequence so that they're in more smaller worlds, but they're in the realm of possibility. So if everything is an arbitrary true false question and answer game, as long as you get a false, you can't follow the false. You have to go and start a new true. But if you go true, your next question is true or false. You choose true again, and your next question is true and false, and you stack a few truths together, and then one of those truths turns out to be false. You can back up to the point where you can take a different route in any sort of game except for linear time life. There, you're stuck where you are. But I'm not sure linear time life is a game that we play. It's just our understanding of what we've been taught.
You know, I mean, that show, Quantum Leap, you brought it up, or I guess we talked about right before this. There's the whole, you know, for people who haven't seen it, who haven't lived through the best generation, if not the greatest. There was a Scott Bakula, Czech man, playing Dr. Sam Beckett, much like the name of the play writer. And he's an agent for the government, and he's convinced them that he can time travel and he can help them win missions. But he ends up jumping from one important event to another important event that needs him to change something that someone just didn't put the love into just doing the most passionate, compassionate, you know, saintly thing that they could have done. And then he leaps into the next moment, and it's realigning timelines. It's not that different from our reality, but it's like amazing how different it is because the little things that matter, such as he goes to this university and he meets this girl, and he's cool enough to talk to her at college about Lemaire instead of Einstein, right? And Lemaire is the Belgian Jesuit philosopher and physicist priest who gave all of the math and ideas to Einstein. And Einstein, he was a real, you know, if there's one thing you could really give him, because there's that movie Young Einstein about the Tasmanian who invented a new electric guitar pedal. I think Einstein really is like that goofy. He was just a major troll. He was a great PR guy because he took people's serious work and he just lied about it like terribly. And it wasn't good math. And we all know that. He's a bad mathematician. He's a terrible teacher. And he's not even very creative, like at all. But the one thing he did that was kind of, at least, you know, I don't want to call it anything other than cliche, except for maybe novel, but he said that God doesn't exist, right? That's basically why he's famous. Just taking Lemaire's good hard work, when he tried to, he's like, you know, what if this all happened without some sort of cosmogenesis, without some sort of a breath moving across the dark waters, making let there be light out of the darkness? What if there wasn't that? Well, I mean, that's cute and all, but, like, you know, it's rubbish. Like, there's no, I mean, give me a better word than balderdash. I don't want to know what to say on the radio besides these antiquated terms that are totally socially acceptable. But yeah, there's no way, you know, and he finally admitted it, and then he died. That's Einstein. So Lemaire, though, Quantum Leap, you know, Sam Beckett, his favorite physicist, he talks much more about the cosmogenesis. He talks much more about our connection, about nonlinear time, about the moments of love that connect things. And again, this is a geologist and a physicist. He's not just a poet. Sure, you know, he invented the Big Bang Theory, the real one, the one that actually might work, but he's just too deep because he's moving towards a divine purpose away from serving self. So it's just not compatible with where they're going, you know, and especially because in order to not serve God, you have to steal your energy from someone who does. So everyone's trying so hard to push away from Lemaire and from Teilhard de Chardin, because Teilhard de Chardin, he's the one who goes and says, hey, we're all atoms socializing in order to serve God, and the evolution is worship. I mean, if we had any sort of correlation between true spirituality, you know, I think McKenna loves Chardin, then we might have gone a different route than we set on, which is to push the self and manifest itself through getting it as powerful as possible with their corporations, which are, energy bodies that have been possessed by money energy. So we're building this system in order to move away from doing what's right. But then you lead back into like, what is the reason? What is the connection to time travel and masonry or Mormonism? What is the connection between the aesthetic of reality and arabesque? Why is Islam pushing so hard? Why is the Jesuit Maltese? Why do they push Islam so hard? And is it because they understand submission is the only way to avoid changing the system if you're moving through these we call them time traveling, but changes from one moment to another, right? It seems like if you can change from one moment to another, you've accomplished everything you really wanted from the time travel idea. And so if you're able to move from one moment and you can make the moment the way you manifest it, you use game theory. You make a talisman that connects you to another version of you who's more successful in another reality, and start pulling from that reality into this one. How, using, Dungeons and Dragons talk, but it works. I've seen it. So, I mean, there's something to it, right? So what is
Absolutely.
the point of
Miles, what's up?
I'm sorry, the key thing, but
no, man. I mean, like
was
Miles, you always tell someone when you know.
oh well, I was just getting that the whole Einsteinian con is perfect in the sense that what came up for me is the gentleness of David Bohm and his explicit order, and he was describing exactly what you guys were just saying, just in a different way. And you know about his work?
I'm not familiar with.
Go on. It's okay.
Tell us
We're
about his work.
not familiar enough. We need your perspective.
Oh no, I just thought that because of what was talked about Einstein, and that was great, Lenny. That I never. I mean, what a fool to think.
You're breaking up, unfortunately.
Because David Bohm's theory of you were talking about game theory and how fast we can manifest things, and it's a possibility that we were getting into. That the constellations are not the same at all. We looked up last night again, and this time we didn't even see what we thought of as a Big Dipper. It wasn't even there last night. And we have perfect, clear view of everything. And it blew us away. And we don't know what to think now. Lynn's more familiar with the stars than I am, and she knows her constellations, and she can't spot one.
Don't freak me out. I'm gonna have to look for the giant dipper, and there's all of these. I don't know what the legal term for geoengineering is these days. Clouds, I guess they're calling them. So I can't really see between the grids of clouds.
Yeah, at another point in time, I would love to get into the geoengineering issue with you, but I just looked up and noticed that we're in the last 10 minutes of the show. And this is The New Way on Steampunk Radio. I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme. You've been listening to Andreas Xirtus talking with us about Tartary. Gary, you have something to add to us?
Yeah, somebody just mentioned that some of the stars were missing. In the Bible, it talks about the dragon removing a third of the stars from the sky. Just a correlation I thought of.
Oh, that's so good, dude. That is exact. That where is that? That's in Revelation or Isaiah? Can you show me that? I love that.
It's in Revelation. It's probably somewhere around the 12th verse, somewhere around there. Revelations 12 happened 9/23/2017. So they're talking about that dragon that's going to consume that planet that's being born. So it's in that part of the scriptures.
That's so useful. I can't stress how much I appreciate that. I hope that we're talking more soon. And I also want to just really quickly say, anybody, please check out tartarynova.com. tartarynova.com is where we all connect stuff, and I'm not talking the whole time those moments, so it's pretty easy for you to like get a word in edgewise there. But thank you so much for letting me be part of this for so long.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Well, we thank you. It's quite enlightening.
Likewise, this is incredible.
A lot of what this is about is exploring ways of looking at things in new ways. And I like to change my letter spellings. New means we take everything we thought we knew, and way means to reconsider it in a different context and see how well it measures up. If the timeline has taken a Fibonacci growth in some forms and a Fibonacci shrinkage in other forms, if we look at 2012 as a node where timelines go through the node and get spun back out as a frequency distribution over time, then some of us might be going from here to ancient Egypt. Others of us might be going from here into the Renaissance. Still others might be going into the future and going to play in space. But for those of us who are on a timeline on the particular Earth we're on who want to go linear forward, we have to wait until the 2012 event happens and we're in a Groundhog's Day type loop, where every day we experience the same day with the same stuff going on, but it goes in cycles, and those cycles can be measured in terms of winter, spring, summer, and fall. And Strauss and Howe in the history book, The Fourth Turning, explain how these cycles play in 80-year cycles and larger cycles, where now we are at the point where winter has ended and we're ready for a new spring. So the next 80 years are supposed to be a spring in a 320-year cycle. And if that 320-year cycle is a new spring, that means that something is going to change the unique circumstances of us to take us in a different pattern direction. This happened at World War II. It happened at the Civil War. It happened at the revolutions. And it didn't happen when Newton was mucking up with things at that point in history. And because it didn't happen there, the people in control got to be in control by doing some things that changed the world as we know it. So the big reveal here, I think, is that the Tartarian history is a measure of allowing us to take a different perspective on the stories we've been told and look at it in context of those stories and figure out where the BS in the storyline is so that we can get things right for a future that will be created as younger and younger people start figuring out we're here and start taking leadership roles to make it so that we are organized to create a planet as they need it to be to work within fairness and equity. Because that's the one thing that the current rendition of the world isn't really giving us, is that we don't have a sense of fairness and equity at all. All we have is a way of going on and being who we are. And if that's all we can do, we can definitely explore deeper these concepts of time and space and start looking at things like If the movies are telling us truth and the truth has been telling us falsehoods, then which movie set do we want to be in? Can we play the role of a Highlander where you don't die until your head's chopped off? Or are we in a role of Terminator with Arnie coming to save the human race in Terminator 2 because he realized the destruction from Terminator 1? Or is it just The Matrix, as everybody now thinks because it's the latest popular event? Or is it Harry Potter? Because Harry Potter is teaching people that magic exists. And by the fact that magic exists, well, now they can start thinking differently, and times change as times change. So we've been here on The New Way. We thank you for listening. You've been listening on Steampunk Radio. I'm Dr. Lenny Thyme. I'd like to thank Andreas again and other people who contributed to the conversation. Thank you much, and we'll see you later.
God bless.
And we are now off.
I think it was something to the effect of your super professional bumper music that made me nervous enough to talk so much. I apologize. Can't help myself sometimes. But man, what a cool show. I like that.
Yeah, I can send you an MP3 copy of the show, and all I need is an email address. Drop it to me in a DM, and then somebody can copy that show. We can clip the first portion off and make it a standalone, but this can definitely be remade into a form that works.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody have a YouTube account they could post that to? I'd like to share it on mine, but there's a time limit to the stuff I can post there. But if it's
Mike,
originates on a different site, it's
put it on Xirtus too. We can put it right on Xirtus too if you want, and then I can put some memes on it for Xirtus 1 later.
Lee,
YouTube channel?
I'll get it to you. I'll get it to Lee, and then Lee can get it around to everyone else.
Great show, guys. Really interesting.
Thank
I
you.
wanted to go into the foundling
sure.
thing a little more, you guys, because of the psychology that what I was trying to get to is, Andreas, tell us about, please, just for a second, if you can, tell us about how.
Excuse me, can you hold on a minute? Are you still recording, Lenny?
No, I had to drop my recording because I don't know when, but I lost the station, but I still had the recording going. So I have the whole recording of what we were doing. How much of it went over the air, I don't know, because my computer was frozen, but still recording. But once we're on air and going, I can't reboot. I have to reboot everything.
It's absolutely up to the spirit of Pac-Man's controller how much of that recording is allowed to be heard. Sounds like.
Yeah,
I wonder if we can get
recorded. Lee, did you record it? Are you recording? Okay, he's
okay, good. We're gonna get a copy of it for sure then, right?
Yes.
Did you record from before we started, or only when we started? You're very appreciate your help. Thank you very much, sir.
Hey, and Lee, tell everybody about where your YouTube channel is, if you would, so that people could see your cloud therapy as well as listen to shows.
Oh, that might be a better place, man. Oh my gosh, you've got cloud therapy videos. We could put some clouds behind it.
Oh, cloud therapy is great. Yes, the show is over as far as being on air.
Well, I know, but for the people that are in the chat,
Show's not over.
I think
We're
he
still
said
on
it's open.
chat.
So he's still recording. Let me post his link in the chat so people can find it. That work?
You all, I'll be back here in a little while. I'll talk to you soon. It was an excellent show.
Bye.
God bless. I hope to hear from. I gotta be coming around here more. You guys, I should be listening to you guys. What? Like, I didn't know that this was so. You know, I'm sorry I get busy trying to make this stuff. I forget how much everybody else does.
That's okay, because the radio listening audience doesn't know it all.
Right.
Double nuts and Margaret, and I mean, I knew more. I mean, I know NY Stink. I know half of you guys. Awesome. I mean, but the ones I don't, I really got to listen to more because I'm sure you know amazing stuff. I was really surprised about that third of the clap stuff from Stubbles, and then Margaret. I know that I don't know you personally, but I heard some things that Lenny was saying had led to things, so I'm pretty fascinated.
Thanks. I'm glad to be a part of your server over there. It's a lot of stuff. There's so much stuff on there. It takes hours to go.
Thank God. I mean, because, but the thing is, if you just watch other people's videos who watch our videos now, it seems like about a month or 6 months later, you could totally get about 10% of what we were saying misunderstood. So don't worry. It's out there somehow. But if you watch it directly, there's a lot more going on. And if you go into the radio station, like the guys that are talking, the girls and guys that are making leaps. Oh my God, Brittany just found out all stuff about volcanoes and how they do alchemy and like the reason why they can make a volcano in 6 months underground, underwater, and then they have a nuclear power plant. Nuclear, in a sense, is run off the radiation from a volcano. And they're doing it. It's not like we're talking about it because we're thinking. It's not speculation. This is just reading off their website. So, I mean, I'm so glad other people. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, the foundling stuff, like that was like I ran into that like a few years back, and it's kind of funny that Miles brought that up because we were talking last night about what we have to endure here on Earth, like through family and just different things. And I'm wondering if that has to do with all of that. When the children were what could those children have gone through? Like, did they wonder? I mean, because I have memories from when I was 2, and my family doesn't understand how I remember these stories that I tell them, but I remember everything from 2 on. And they always compliment how I have such an amazing memory because they're like, we can't understand how you remember stuff when you were 2.
Don't remind me that I have photographic memory of that. Yeah, I know that feeling.
But I wonder what those kids like remembered, and our ancestors that wouldn't even be our true ancestors, besides the immediate grandparents and great grandparents or whatever. But who the hell would be that whole freaking thing of people giving their DNA and shit? I mean, that's a joke in itself. And then you don't even really know like where your history goes back to if they stole those children from people and freaking set them in schools and taught them a history that they wanted to teach them.
Exactly. And that's why I was talking about it looking like a psychic break in history, if you look at it psychologically. Because who is that guy, David something, that has the Tartary video about the foundlings, about the trains, and it's an amazing one because he connects the mud floods, not just that they were switching children around from country to country because of the language differences and the social experimentation, but because of the mud floods. And
they used them as slaves and like made them work and everything.
What I'm saying is he'll even tell he even tells us that up to the 4th generation, about 1860, 1865, they had already started to the foundlings were matched with the males and females were matched. They didn't know each other, and they were forced marriage. So there were a lot of forced marriages because nobody, it wasn't about socialization. It was about work.
Right, but if we're consciously connected with energy and consciousness, then maybe that's where a lot of these people have their faults and the manipulation and the psychological projection and all the stuff that they battle with within themselves that they project on others to make other people miserably unknowingly, like the Bible says, or they know not what they do. That is true to some form because
well, exactly. And that's what Andreas, you said it one time when we were all talking, or I heard you on a video when you were talking about the foundling situation, and somehow you connected it to the whole idea that, okay, if whoever took over after the mud floods and recreated society, they trained those children and those children never had a childhood. So 4 generations back, just imagine children that had to work, and a great movie for this is Children of the Lost City.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm saying is their dreams were taken, their imaginal was taken, and a whole reality was forced into them that they had no other idea of what reality was except for these overlords, what they ever told them. So we are the byproducts of that generation.
To realize it about the Lost City, I think you might be the first person to get the Tartaria reference. Even me, I didn't get it at first. It just freaked me out as a kid.
Well, that's funny because, it's not funny, but, you look at the ways our society that we always knew. I mean, I'm 38. I don't know how old everybody else is, but even Lenny's generation, I mean, a lot of them stayed home with their children. The women would stay home, and I'm staying home with my kids, and like I notice what a difference between my friends that send them off and then just hand them iPads and all this junk, and I'm like doing it totally different. What a different, they have imagination, they are funny, they are free thinkers, and that's what was lost. Those poor children didn't have to do, they had to work and stuff.
Well, think of how they could do that to them, fracturing their minds, brainwashing them. They're doing that to us today. They like to pit us against each other in wars.
Right. Well, the wars, that's...
I'm scarred the other direction. My parent, you could tell because I can't shut up. My father at the dinner table, my grandfather said, when I was probably 3 or 4, I remember it vividly. My grandfather said, "Children are meant to be seen and not heard." I wouldn't be surprised if he's, a member of the Foundry. But, my father stood up at the table. It was quiet for like 3 seconds at most. Silent. 1, 2, 3. Stands up and he just looks at everyone, looks at my grandmother, looks at my mother, looks at my grandfather. And he says, "That's the way things were when I was a kid. I didn't like it at all. I don't think I want that for my child. In fact, what I want for my child is that he could say what he wants to say, and I'll believe him when he says it. I can know what's going on in his life, and he knows he can tell me things. So, if you don't want to be a part of his life, that's your choice. You don't have to sit at the same table with him. We can sit at another." Something like, I think verbatim.
Wow, what a stand-up guy.
Yeah, my dad's cooler than me by a long shot. But
yeah, my dad too.
Well, that's a good goal. But yeah, at the same time, now I talk a lot, so.
I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have my dad. He's the coolest shit.
Yeah, he definitely wasn't a joiner. But, then I look at my grandfather. My grandfather was cool as beans. He was kind of a jerk, it sounds like. But
did you say a joiner?
Yeah, my father was no sort of joiner. He was like, Groucho Marx said, my father didn't want to be in the Freemasons, and my grandfather was trying to get him to do the Demolay, And he's like, I don't want to do this. And he's like, well, in order to quit, you have to sign a letter saying why you want to quit. He wrote a letter, which is weird, by the way, especially for an organization named after a burned at the stake pedophile. But okay, or at least arrested for Gimale. But so my father said, look, nothing's sinister. I just don't want to be part of. I would never want to be a part of a club that someone else would have me as a member of.
Sounds
what
like
kind of crazy
Groucho
people
Marx.
would associate with a person like me? And I thought, that's funny, but that's Groucho Marx's line. And my father's no sort of joiner because of that. Meanwhile, my grandfather, he joined, and he didn't show up to the meeting. He did what he had to do because my grandmother wanted him to be socially acceptable. He has a job. He went to college. He did what he needed to do. He worked the Columbia shuttle. He did what he had to do, but it wasn't because he wanted to. He'd rather wear a flamingo Hawaiian hat and hang out. So I mean, realistically, like this whole idea of impressing people, it's a boundary. Who the hell are you trying to impress? These fucking aristocracy that can't get shit done for themselves because they're nebbish. I mean, it doesn't seem very practical.
I think they were just trying to change history into the way they wanted it to be. Because I want to think that there was a civilization that was at peace, and these small group of people came in and just decided to fuck things up.
Well, it's interesting, Andreas. You're talking about, how your grandfather was or whatever, and how he said he just wanted to hang out and do his thing instead of nefarious shit. And reading up on Trump's supposed family history, it's very interesting because supposedly the father comes from a line where when he made all his money and he came to America, he was German. The aristocracy.
I thought it was the uncle.
Well,
the uncle was the one that got tested.
No. The uncle is the brother of the father. But I'm talking about the guy that made the father that made the money. It wasn't. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Supposed to be some Irish guy.
Well, no, the mother's Scottish.
Scottish.
And she comes from the line of
English.
The Lionheart guy. That played.
Though, right? She was a royal with nothing at that point, and so she married a guy who'd owned brothels. That's the way it worked. He was a guy who had made it because there was a collapse of a bunch of material, and he'd gone down the river with some groups and recollected all the material. I think a boat had crashed or something to that effect, and then along the river they went down. They knew it was coming, and they collected all this stuff. This is an old. Read a book sometime called Skeletons Across the Sahara about the guys from the same Cape as Captain Ahab from Moby Dick who showed up in the Santa Cruz Bay of Africa, and their boat crashed against something, and they ended up getting all their stuff stolen, including themselves, sold to into slavery. This is basically what he did, and I don't remember. I want to say Colorado River, right? I think this is where that happened. Silver. You can look it up for yourself. I could be wrong, but maybe it was Nevada, but I think it's Colorado. So eventually, he had to find somebody to marry with all that money to live right. You ever see the size of the beehive on the head of Donald Trump's mother? I mean, she was clearly, she understood it, even if she didn't have it. She knew what class was. I mean,
yeah, she did.
So that helped a lot for a guy going to brothel, But at the
the beehive was huge.
I don't. I think a lot of people have weird, unnecessary hate while they love what the applause button on for George W. Bush. Everybody was down, but you got to imagine Donald Trump also rescued a woman, or at least we think so, from the modeling agency. He tried to stop rapism, from being a patriarchal move. He had some weird damsel in distress savior complex as well. That's not the worst one to have. There's worse complex.
Are you saying that Trump is really chivalrous? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying chivalry is a better fetish than rape. I'm just saying, if you prefer to save someone, then hold them down on a train track.
Make them look like your little princess daughter. What have you noticed? Melania is like changing her face to look like his daughter.
No,
princess.
That's something I think that maybe Melania is doing because of his love for his daughter, and I don't think maybe
Might be a
there's
subconscious thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I understand it also because she's insecure and as intelligent as she is, because I think she's smarter than she's probably smarter than me. At least 5 languages correct. With granted, I have a Ninja Turtle accent, whatever language I speak as well, but she's got her own thing. She's also a very sweet human being, but she might be, like anybody, she seems obsessed with bullying to a level that might be personal. So I don't know. I think there might be something human about this that we're missing.
Oh, this is very funny because you're talking. Have you guys looked at Barron Trump lately? He's looking more and more like Tesla. Just put a mustache on him.
Oh yeah.
Trump is my favorite manga character. If I had to put stickers on my car or get comic books about the superhero, I mean, I don't know when they're gonna. Somebody, how much money can we get? Guys, Baron von Trump.
Wasn't Baron in a book?
Listen, I was going to tell you guys, I'm pretty sure that the Baron von Trump's Adventures, that book by Ingersoll.
Yeah.
Inside it, I believe that it says that he went through Tartarus under the ground. I'm pretty sure.
Time travel too, right?
I know, but I'm saying through his time travel, he said he went through Tartarus. I'm pretty sure.
It's a trilogy. Yeah, he goes through Tartarus. It's right in, I think it's page 38 of Baron von Trump's Underground Adventure. They mentioned, first off, he has a dog. And then the dog, I've been following this book to support this president, right? So
I am so glad, bro, because I have too.
And it's becoming more real. But the worst part is
it's crazy. And Andreas, I figured this out, dude. Listen, on the trilogy of Back to the Future, the duality between Biff and Michael J. Fox is the duality between what we want Trump to do. Is he going to be a Biff or is he going to be a Michael J. Fox? Because the Professor Trump, who the professor in Back to the Future is, it's all because of him that Biff even came around. Do you see what I'm saying?
So he's going to be whatever you want him to be, because if we create our own realities, then we can create.
Everything grows from shit, and Biff hates manure, I think is the legendary thing. But this whole idea in the Back to the Future also of history repeating itself over and over again. So there's this legend that it happened before, so it will happen again. So we need to change it, right? There's an aesthetic. This is that Mandela thing. We're looking into the book, and it talks about there's Baron von Trump and his dog. So there was a dog that was the same freaking kind of dog that they were about to get. It was going to be the first dog. It was the first president without a first dog. And he could have gotten another. So why didn't he?
Right. It's just so coincidence. It's so creepy.
It's important for this whole thing that no one understands it. But without him having that dog, you have to figure who is the dog now for Baron Trump, And also, you've noticed that they've basically moved the Trump Tower to Florida. He's not hanging out in Washington D.C. where they're spying on him and witches and dog sacrifices. This is another thing you need to know about when they did the Trump ritual. I know a bunch of people that hate Trump, okay? And I don't have a lot of hate. I don't have a lot of time for it. I don't have a lot of love, maybe, either. And I think that's bad about me. But
I think it's safe to say we're all neutral on that.
You guys, this is getting too weird. It's getting way too weird now. Because that Q drop, did you know that, Andreas, the Q drop recently before the Mandela effect was that the Titanic never sank and it got and nobody ever died? And that was a Q drop before the Mandela effect. And that's really freaky because Q's connected to Trump. So, you know.
Well, I mean, I think we've all, I don't know. I want to save this story for another time. I have personal feelings and emotions about like my psychedelic experience watching Titanic 3D the night that it aired on the 100th anniversary of its sinking. And I didn't know that this was happening. We happened to go there to see it, you know, obviously, because who does it on purpose? I was like, whoa, this is like, that was August 12th, 1912, the year that the Titanic sank, the last sun it set before it ever sank. And then I was like, whoa, like, August 12th, 2012, dude. But, and we're like, what is 3D, you know, it was super scary, that one. But in general, we all, I think, know what happened. I hope that there was William Randolph Hearst and the JP Morgan and the Mellon brothers were working for, I think they had 8 to 12% of the stock of Morgan Company under the Warburg and the Saxe-Von Goth. And so the House of Saxe-Coburg-Von Goth had organized the removal of, you know, after the, you know, I think before the second crash, after the first 1907 crash. So they organized the removal of the funds of these particular families. So if you watch that scene where in Titanic she's like introducing to Jack the who or whatever of the Titanic, those people who all die, including the dude holding his wife on the boat, those people were all extremely important to the financial world at that time. They were successful, self-made people, kind of like Saddam Hussein, you know. But then they were removed, and I don't believe that they died in the way that we were told. I think that they used examples of these boats, and yeah, but I do believe that they murdered a number of people.
Yeah, I think so too.
But hey, you know, this is like what we do, September 11th. CNN. So I'm pretty down. I'm pretty good at decrypting fake news from the inside out. Like, so I tried doing the fake history, and I'll tell you, like, there's a couple stories that really blow my mind that the public were so stupid. One of them is Titanic. The other one is the Spanish-American War, and the third is the Napoleonic War. It seems like those three things are just so unbelievable, and at the same time, people will have evidence where people say, "You give me the power to print the papers, and I'll you give me the paper printing, and I'll give you the war. You know, let me publish this newspaper. There'll be a war. Trust me. All I got to do is post a meme that says like soldiers from your town are getting killed, and it was the beginning of it. You know, and back then also Boss Tweed will always say, like, "Oh, no one could read, but they see cartoons, and I was fat in them." So those cartoons destroyed, you know, the gangs in New York and the whole complex. So I don't know.
How you guys doing? I don't know. Are you guys able to hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just want to add a few things. My phone's gonna die, and then my boss is gonna come back. One thing I want to say is that I used to have all these dreams of me being like stuck on a train. I would always think it's the Holocaust, and I would smell bleach everywhere. And something I've noticed that a lot of Jewish people I run into can't take the smell of bleach. I don't know if that has anything to do with formaldehyde or any of the stuff you were talking about. I just thought that was interesting. The other thing is, like, I'm not very well studied. A lot of the stuff I get just comes through me being like blanked out and, you know, kind of being in that zero field. And a lot of information that I look up, I'll find it, and then if I ever go to look it up again, it's either not the same, or from me looking on the internet, it's completely disappeared. But I find that there's, you know, right now we have TV, but there was a point where the only way to control the masses was the written language. And so there's this point where there's a Strauss or a Faust who the first like printing press, and I see that there's the Gottberg kind of took it from them, and after that controlled the major printing of all books. And so before that, I think there wasn't mass book printing. So I definitely think there's something with that and controlling the words as the worlds kind of go that might have to do with all this kind of stuff. And so Yeah, again, a lot of the stuff I find, I don't even know how the dots connect, but then as things play out with all of you, I see where they get picked up.
Well, there's a huge push right now to make Jewish people non-interested and actually reactionary to Tartaria, because especially, and I've noticed this particularly with Israelis. We have a lot of Jewish people that are involved with the movement, and there's a lot of Israelis. And the only people that give a shit about telling people about Tartaria are government and media people that are saying, "Hey, don't you get involved with this because it could be anti-Semitic." Which is basically the whole movement. But you're like, okay, you got these people that are Israeli that are saying, hey, we were brought here from Russia on trains because there was a Stalinized version of Zion that was created because they were afraid of the CIA Zion. And there's all this idea of trains to these camps to create philosopher's stones. So the idea of bleach, even in terms of the Fight Club experience, yeah, dude, the full burning ritual, no one wants to address it. The same as nuclear. They don't want to actually figure out what they really are. They're not. Is what it is at the end of the day? Is this idea of all of the world? There was a nation that kind of connected us all together. They gave the idea of cities, citizens, and those cities you had citizenship. The ships would go in those cities back and forth. And meanwhile to that, you have nomads that work the land. So those were two connected nations, right? And between the two of them, you have what we now consider the Sephards and the Ashkenazi. You could also consider the Aryan and the Scythian. I mean, this is the part that gets really brutal, and I'm glad it's not on the radio. It kind of freaks people out, is that the Jewish nation was scattered amongst the earth. It's both historical fact, but also literally, not just historical fact. It actually happened.
They have them in Morocco, for example, and they trace their lineage back to Middle South Asia.
Well, it's funny too because
I've had Hasidic Jews in the Peruvian Amazons. They're everywhere. This idea somehow that we're all separate from each other is a very new concept in the last 4 centuries.
It's funny, in that last video I made, I connected how, the guy you had on your show that was talking about Xenos the Barbarian, it's also just as much Xenos with an X. And XI is a dragon, and you guys brought up the dragon before, and then really Zion, if you want to trace the Z back, it's really just an XION. So they're basically just constantly ciphering the language so that if you do come in here, you don't even know the system you're coming in because they just switched it. So I guess that's kind of what I'm realizing, that I've always had this weird shit with language and I've never been able to put my finger on it. And then all of a sudden, I guess I stopped ignoring the synchronicities, and then now I'm here. So that's kind of just what's going on. And also, out of all the people that you guys reach, how many of them are really descendant from the Kohanim? I don't know. But I know that, as far as I can tell, between the people I talk to on these Discords and the one other Discord I'm at, Secret Energy, I'm the only person that might even have a Jewish descendant from these people. And so I don't know what that means, but I know it has to do with the volcanism and the volcanoes, and that there was definitely a lot of sacrificing going on. I'm not going to ignore what my ancestors may or may not have done. That has no reflection on me. But what I'm noticing is, if you have all these symbols that were probably everybody's and meant something great, and then you're like, oh, it means something bad, you're just cutting yourself off from anybody that came before you by just saying this symbol's bad, or that these people were, demon worshippers, or whatever kind of storyline they give.
And there could be some positivity to the Foundry because of that, because of a fresh perspective for people that step away and they don't feel like they have to pay their parents' mortgage, But at the same time, I think you may have, it sounds like you're looking into this stuff, you may have seen all this stuff like Cole and Auschwitz. I don't know if you've seen Cole and Auschwitz. It's about the rabbi who was disappeared because he went in there looking for evidence, and he was kind of a revisionist historian after that. He realized that the story isn't exactly however it's told. And, by the way, the story in 1989 of the Holocaust camp is not the same story that's told in 2019. And we can believe whatever the official story is today, but it changes every day. Just about as often as like the acronym for LGBTQ whatever. It just keeps changing, and you have to just go with it. I don't even remember if millions
it changes all the time, and then they change the names, and then it's always changing the names so that once people find out that what they think that might possibly be the puzzles that the pieces that fit the puzzle, then they change the name of things, and it's like you're right back to square one because you can't get.
Sorry.
As Americans don't need to like believe anything other than what they want to. It's not a big deal. But Europeans, I keep advising to just say, yeah, I believe whatever I don't know what it is exactly, but whatever the current friggin' historical narrative is today at 6 p.m. or whatever it is. Yeah, I say I believe that affirmatively, and just remind me to change it because it does. I think that helps understand how much it is.
And you brought up the Baron Von. The Von is a title, and in that same video I spoke about how Von just basically ties back to every other Kane or any other one of these names you want to put. It's just a title. So when whoever this Baron Von is, it makes me think of Janos von Neumann, who wrote a lot of the scripts that we're dealing with and made had a lot to do with time travel. As far as what I've researched, I don't even know if that's true. Again, a lot of the stuff I research, when I look back and again, it disappears.
Are you Jewish? So you know like if you look at the letters, right? So you look at
there's 22 letters.
Yeah, you look at the G and the B, right? Like the Bet and the Gimel.
Yeah, the Fey, the Five, Bay, yeah.
Yeah,
no, it's Proto-Phoenician.
This is why you go to Spain, and I'm in Spain, right? Like you look at Bon. People ask me, "Do you like bands?" And I'm like, "Which one?" And then, "Oh, you mean the shoes? Got it. Bon. I don't know, you mean like Don.
You got bands. Nothing wrong with them.
Yeah,
Johnny Joplin, Janis Joplin, got it. But so if you look at the bands, you're like, okay, so Bon and Vaughn and Dawn. You've got the Dawn, who's Bon. Bon is good and godly. You've got the son of God, who's a lord, right? You have a lord of the land.
God,
man. That's why he's a god of the land. So I mean, Vaughn means more than just you come from there.
So Andreas, I'm not joking. Like, I don't really know anything that you just said, right? Like I said, everything I get is like intuitive, letting kind of spirit drive me. I'm not like self-promoting myself. I'm not like self-promoting myself, but the video I just made a couple of days ago, literally I just said everything you said. I just don't know where it came from. And maybe it's coming from you in the quantum realm trying to communicate with me in some other fucking way, obviously, because we already know how many times you talk to somebody and the reality just changed from the discussion you had. So, I have all these family names that, are in my family. You brought up Highlander before. My grandfather's a Hollander or a Holy Lander or a Chaldeander or whatever you want to say. He's the one that's also, him and his brothers were the Kohanim. And when I talk to my family and I tell them the stuff I find, they just deny it because, again, I've had all these memories like you were talking about when you were a kid that I remember. And if they have to remember it the way that I do, that means they have to admit whatever they did that they don't like about themselves. So there's also this whole
Yeah, they could have forgotten
family.
It too.
I mean, we came from France. We were expelled during the revolution, and when I talk to my family about like the truth and stuff, they don't remember any. Well, it's like they don't even notice what's going on around them.
Yeah, and I'm saying stuff they should remember from when I was a kid, like about me growing up and memories I have. But see, there are points where they did something that would be kind of against how the people in this group, see the reality or how you should treat your kids.
I'm always scared when we get to this part of the conversation. Let's see. How do you feel about... Okay, so, all right. In terms of telling children what to do, my first thought has to go to circumcision. I'm sorry. But if you got this idea of, if you say, okay, by the time someone's 13, they might be able to make the decision, maybe 18, or who knows, whichever point. But if they're born and you start dunking them underwater, you start removing their clitoris, right? As children in Africa, they remove the baby's clitoris. You remove the foreskin. It's a sort of non-consensual genital mutilation, or just mutilation in general. It's not the same as a taboo. A taboo is a ritual to become an adult, right? And if you talk to Victor in the group, the word adult actually means born, has to do with being a child animal. So animals are considered adult. It's like a domino thing means like the animal. But it becomes only more interesting and important when we're talking about this, because you have this Chaldean ritual of these kids were forced after one guy raped a girl or something like that. I think it's a deal in the story of Abraham. And the next tribe is circumcised while they're circumcised.
Did when they conquered tribes too.
Subject, like, I'm not actually against anybody doing sort of bodily mutation. If you want to mutilate yourself, I'm not actually against it. But I honestly know a lot of people really are. My thing is just, dude, can you please give the kid a few years to choose? Because I think it would be really interesting to see what would happen to the whole culture. He did that. It would probably disappear. It would probably fucking disappear. And I don't mean the culture, but just the part about the mutilation. And, and especially taking away a child's choice. But I mean, I know this is
deeply ingrained in the psyche.
Potentially talk about it. I don't mean to. I just mean it's an interesting subject to me, especially if you look at people who say, "Yeah, man, you have to do it to my kids, or else."
Yeah.
And you're like, "Well,
no,
dang,
I mean, I know just people who've rejected that.
Children don't. Children are property of this thing, this culture. So they don't have a right to change it. It has to exist.
It's a dogma. Yeah, you're right. From what I can tell, I used to, way back in the day, I'm a non-circumcised, but it seemed to have gone back all the way to Egypt in like the 5th dynasty, 5,000 years ago. You were slaves. It was a mark of your slavery was to be circumcised, bodily mutilation. And then after that, I don't know why it got ingrained, but another thing is when different tribes or groups would conquer other groups, that would be the first thing they did to all the males that survived the battle. Very strange.
Absolutely. It removes a certain amount of sexual feeling. I mean, there's a lot of negative things that we talk about. I mean, I've heard positive too, by the way. Like, I have a friend, David,
There's positive and negative, pros and cons to both. But and parents don't do that just because they think that it's a cultural thing.
I don't think my father did it to my dad. I hate to talk for him, but I like that he didn't.
Yeah, but didn't you say he had ties with groups and different things, like other influences?
My grandfather was Croatian, and so he was superstitious. I put a knife in a loaf of bread, he would freak out, cross himself. You don't stab the body, you know what I mean? But like, he's got a whole bunch of weird things. So when my father said, children are going to be hurt, and my son, he's like, everyone, everyone, that's what they do. They circumcise kids at the hospital. That's what God wanted, according to the Masonic, Catholic, Jewish conspiracy, whatever it is. My dad's like, well, they can
not every hospital, though, like...
No, the hospital, that's a fucked up thing. Hospitals do it now. Don't confuse that. It's not just...
It used to be like 80% in the 80s.
Yeah, but it depends on what area you are, because the hospital where my kids were born, they tried talking me out of it.
Well, so I mean, maybe you're not, but Detroit, New York City, all of these major cities. Even Santa Cruz, I noticed that they do it to people. They say they're going to get it done because it's going to be, then they won't use soap as much because boys are dirty. I don't know what they're trying to say. But in general, they're trying to put this whole agenda that we need to have it done in a hospital, and then you have no ritual tied to it. So it's even weirder because the kid has no attachment why he was mutilated at all. It's just like, okay, you need to be, and it's a good thing. And it's like that's what causes so many people to move away from God. The childhood stage, they're told, what is God? God's the person who tried to mutilate you.
I don't know.
It really fractures the mind.
Also, Carly's with me right now. She asked me what my mom is an OBGYN's opinion. And I'm not sure if that really matters because, but I'll tell you, she's firmly against it. But she did, her residency in Brooklyn in the 80s at a Hasidic Jewish hospital. So she had to live around it for quite some time before she decided she was firmly against it. She's a liberal Catholic from California. She was openly for everything from refugees to whatever. But it takes some time, and she saw, okay, this one where you cut off babies, skin without them, having a choice, that actually isn't super great. Also, similarly, forcing women to birth until death, which is the Hasidic community was doing in Brooklyn at that time, is no longer forced. It's the quality of child as opposed to quantity of child. Apparently, it comes from my mom because she was like the Peace Corps and she was talking to the Hasidic rabbi who they brought in because some woman was having 6 children and she was about to have the 7th. She was like having all the varicose veins and she was about to die, like literally about to die. And they were like, but you have to. And it was basically rape, turning these, making babies. They make them wear these crazy robes. You have sex through. After you do mitzvah, where you wrap a leather strap around your hand. I mean, if you don't know what they're doing to make these sorts of rituals, they're very particular. And,
where is this?
New York City, right in Brooklyn.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, Masons have ties to that city like no other. And, you got the handful of ultra-Zionist Jews controlling everything right from there.
Yeah, but the thing is,
Teflon they wear.
I'm trying to push for is the idea that the Jew doesn't even exist. It's like the Aryan doesn't exist. Tartarians exist. And so what we have is this weird amalgamation of split-ups after they've, it's like saying, we're all United Statesians and we're all Spanians, Europeans, or whatever the hell we're talking about. Like, these are words, So you got these people that are like Zionists because they're creating a new state. Okay, I'll buy that part of it. But like the idea that they're Jewish, what the hell is that? Jutland is a place in Germany,
They're not Jewish. They don't even believe in the same belief systems as Judaism. They're trained at a young age in politics to get implemented into. You should see all that. That's another story in itself.
Oh, I mean, yeah. If you look at Israel, if you're talking about Israel in terms of the blue-eyed,
just Zionists in general, like what they do to those children, and they just put them in schools about politics and how to get into American politics, and other politics, and they don't even teach them about any of Judaism or anything. They're not like even. I got Jewish friends that will even say the same thing.
Yeah, they're moving away from teaching them, and the Israeli idea of Orthodox is referred to as what's it called, Blutsika or something like that. It means bloodsucker. They call them parasitic bloodsuckers, and they'll talk about them like we have to defend the bloodsuckers. Like that's how Israeli politics goes. They don't really like people that are not atheists. They like atheists. And in general, the ones who aren't atheists are allowed to be Baha'i. Baha'i is the UN New World Order religion. Phoebe Hearst was friends with Donald Trump's grandfather, who died in the influenza in 1919. It was all about. The Baha'i freaks me out. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the thing is, if all of these capitals have been moved from one city to another city, so we're looking at the history of Cairo, but Cairo is actually maybe, I forget where Martin said he thought it was now. There was somebody who was thinking it was in Holland or something like that. And then you look at Moscow as Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is a Syrian city, or it's like Canaan, I think is the name. You start realizing that the histories have been submerged to each other. There's a convolution, and so Jutland is Germany, and there's these German people there with blonde, blue-eyed whatevers, and those are the Ashkenazi. And Zion has always been controlled by blonde, blue-eyed, Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi. There's no way that you'll have a Sephard ever control of Israel. It's just not. I mean, I'll put money on it. I'll put Bitcoin on it. It's not going to happen. But you look into the Sephards all over the planet, and you're like, oh, gee, so many of them in Spain, right? So many of them, like Walt Disney, they think was probably actually a Sephard who was at the docks and brought on the foundry train. I don't want to blow that up too hard because I could probably make a video about it first, but you should know. And anyway, there's a lot of examples of these Sephards all over the planet who are connecting us all. And then afterwards, what do? They take the Jutlanders and they say, you got to move to Israel because everything's screwed up. And Israel's actually pretty cool. So we're creating this culture where you have to say, okay, we're going to circumcise you. We're going to change your diet. We're going to make you live a certain way. And you're going to follow mitzvahs. And you might call that Judaism, but it sounds more like Islam. It sounds more like the Templaric idea of Islam, where you just control people and you force them to do stuff from birth. And it's not the same as alchemy, where you're like, okay, Christ lived this way. He was a Jew. He lived this way, and it was cool. Live that way. What the hell is that? What the hell happened to that?
Do you know Sabbatai Zevi?
Repeat that, sorry, Ben.
You know of Sabbatai Zevi? He lived, it says, in August 1626 through September 1676, so very short lifespan. But he's basically the one that came up with the whole Talmudic Judaism and the Goyim and it got to take over the world stuff. I mean, before that, they were really trying to, I wouldn't say they were integrating, but the surrounding cultures, there was a lot of immigration into and throughout, Israel. Or open to things before this guy.
Yeah,
there was like a reform period where they closed in.
The Inquisition idea kind of is the idea where they're like, look, I think George Carlin's probably the best historian ever on the Inquisition. Do you believe in God? Yes. Do you believe in our God? Yes. Do you believe our God's dick is bigger than yours? No. All right, then you can keep living. That's basically what it came down to. If you were a Muslim, you were dead. If you lived in a Muslim state at the time and you didn't believe what you were told, you had to pay a tax for believing it. But before that, what the hell did that mean? Because you had Aryans marrying Africans, and Africans at the time were vegetarians, so there were a lot of blondes. Africans weren't black originally; they moved in. Black Africans moved into Africa and were part of the Scythian Empire. So there's Germanian Africans. The Habsburg family was black nobility. The black nobility is actually what founded the Bilderberg group. So, I mean, in general, everything's mixed up. It's not from where we understand it to be. History's been completely backwards in order to kind of scramble things so we don't know how to look into it. Like, you know that language you read? Now you have to read in Cyrillic. Well, I ought to show you for learning history. They did this a number of times in the old country. But
someone brought up the Gutenberg press, right? And the ones that existed before that. Well, if you trace it, it came from China. It came from Korea. The Korean Peninsula had printing presses like 2,000 years ago. But it looks to me like what happened was the Vatican got hold of the technology in Italy and especially Venice before like England got it. So if they were in control of it, they had a lot of information they could have hid.
Well, Ben, I'd love to do a video about this with you soon, actually. I've been wanting to do
I'm not an expert. I'm just cliff note.
No, but you know some of the stuff, and I'd like to just formulate it creatively with you where we start investigating Chitao. China doesn't exist, right? There's Qin, which is the name of the emperor who fucked it up. And he's kind of Quentin Tarantino's got that production Hero, which is all about how China became. But before that, it was Chitao, and Chitao was the lion on the other side that was of the Tartar Empire, and the Great Wall to keep out the Han and the Kublai Khan connection. So there was really.
I mean, you ever seen that statue, the Forbidden City? There's a bronze or a copper lion, and it's got its paw. Yeah, on this ball that's it's got the geometry all over it. It's this round ball with a lion holding it. It's like the prize.
And Shanghai raviolis don't help dumpling case. I mean, all the pasta. It's funny. We're like smart enough to know all this history now, but even you and me as 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, I don't know when, saw there was a weird correlation between spaghetti and top ramen. Like I'm serious. Like the idea between raviolis and dumplings. As a child, I knew that there was something to that, And then they would say later, oh, well, the Chinese and, Marco Polo. But then they'd say immediately after, but Marco Polo didn't really happen. It's all a lie, and he was in prison. He made it all up because there was no wall of China, and the historian it clearly must have existed. And we now know what's really going on. All these nations didn't exist. You cannot look up these nations before a certain date, and that's how they're able to hide it. Chitao, if you get a real old map, you'll find Barbar, you'll find Tartar, you'll find Chitao, you'll find, the original things. Java Major, I think, is the name of Australia originally. And that's how we get away with hiding the truth right in your plain sight. That's why Tartary Nova is so useful, because people will say, okay, this is the actual name of the thing. You can Google it. You can find out what the heck it really was. But otherwise, history is built around all these terms that cannot be predated. You have to find out the symbols. You have to go back before 1666, which theoretically doesn't exist in the flamenco calendar.
That's the crazy, crazy date. I don't know if anyone else knows it, but London, they say, was in September 1666. Now, I'm almost 95% sure that I researched that in 2011, and it was on September 10th, 1666, when the fire started in the bakers. If you go today, it's a way different date. It's gone. It's changed.
September 10th, is that what you said?
September 10th. So right before.
Oh my God!
So it burned down half the city on September 11th. 666, and the Pentagon was. They said they laid the cornerstone on September 11th of 1941? Just before, and that's still up. That is still there. That has not been changed. I can't find any reference to the old date.
Man, I'm so freaking annoyed at flamenco for not. When I first saw the flamenco thing, I'll be honest, I thought it was being psyop or something. I don't know, because the way they presented the flamenco thing in 2003 or 4 or whatever the heck it was, when I saw YouTube, it was not even YouTube then. It was Google's video. I think Google had just bought YouTube, and Google Video still existed. Google Video was super useful. I understood how to search it better. And YouTube just basically took Google Video and removed all the search index. I was hoping that they'd merge Google, and YouTube together into Google. It's the wrong direction that YouTube took. But at the time, there was a lot of push towards the flamenco thing. I think it was like 1,000 Years That Never Existed. It was the title of the 10-part series. People should probably find that. I'd love it if I could get a copy of that at this point. I should have gotten it years ago. But I was looking at it, and I was like, anybody who says Jesus didn't exist is boring. I didn't really, sorry. It wasn't, I didn't get it. Like, it was, I agree that with myself, like, it's boring to suggest that things don't exist. But, like, they should rephrase it as these things are not the way we were told. And so now we're looking at the 1066 burning in September 10th and connecting it to 9/11. I'm sorry, it's impossible not to.
It connects to the Second World War with the Pentagon, but then that connects to 9/11 because it's all one linear, event. It's not a separate event. It's one event.
Wikipedia September. I don't know how to do.
I can't even find it in the old ones. I can't find the old edits to say that, but I was so stumped by that I made a master list of everything that occurred on the date that has the reduction of that date. Reductions. And that one was for sure scary.
If you look up every date from September 1st to September, maybe even 18th, I don't remember. I can think of off the top of my head at least a dozen fucked up things that happened through history. From the invasion of Poland, I don't know.
40 of them. I think 40 out of 60 dates that I tried had the same reduction. If you do the reduction of September 11, 2001, you get 14. If you do the reduction of July 4th, 1776, you also get 14. They do that one a lot. They like 14 for some reason.
Be recording some of this because a lot of the stuff Ben says, patent.
No, I'll post it all one day in an article and all that. and how to do it, because I mean it's really simple. I'm not even using the I just do my own method. I just do the simple reduction. I do the 3-digit reduction, then the 2-digit, and that's all I do. And I look for the same numbers throughout time. It's literally everywhere. It's aggravating.
So how much effort you believe they put in? Like, for instance, earlier I wanted to think like Shakespeare. Even the friggin' name is like, you know, the idea of unbounding. You might as well have called them the, you know, unbinding of the fasces. You know, like what else do you call Shakespeare? It's like, really?
Somebody told me that he thought, I don't remember, he didn't tell me how he learned this, but he said that Shakespeare was a pen name of John Dee, the magician to the queen.
Right,
you know?
That was also something I wish we could have gone in more. No, I 100% agree. I mean, Francis Bacon, we only mentioned for the money. Let's be real. I mean, he's not that fucking smart. He's a fucking idiot. He's just money. But money people are cool too. Let's be real. If money made Star Wars happen, but you know, that guy Dante, whatever, who did what's the show called? The Last Avatar, Last Airbender, The Last Airbender, and the Star Wars Rebels show. It's done by this guy Dante, and Dante, you know, he's got no money, but he's a genius. So I think that that's the kind of case with Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon gets a lot of credit, but John Dee was a weird schmuck, you know. So like he was into wife swapping.
He was like Sauron. Remember Gandalf the Grey and Sauron the White? He was like the or was it Saruman? The other wizard. That's what he was. That's what he did.
Okay. Yeah, he is. He's a pervert. It's amazing. And also, the only thing I think that Peter Jackson did right about the Lord of the Rings, to be honest, I'm a major troll. The only thing I think he did right was he put Lee, what's his name? Lee. Pace. What? Pace? No. The guy who played Sauron.
Oh, Sauron?
Yeah, he played Lee. Peter Lee, Alex Lee, what's his name? Gosh, I forget his name.
You mean Saruman, the wizard? I get him confused.
The guy who played Sauron. Yeah.
Christopher Lee.
Oh, you're talking about Sauron, like the main evil guy? I was thinking you meant Saruman, the guy with the rainbow coat from the book, who Gandalf loves this guy. Yeah, I'm talking about.
Yeah, Count Dooku.
Radagast?
No. So Radagast smokes weed, right? And Saruman is the other wizard.
White.
He's not white. He was white. Saruman the White wears the rainbow coat. Once he turns evil, he wears a rainbow coat. Does you remember this? You guys read the book or just watch the movie? In the movie, he's just kind of evil. But in the book, he wears a rainbow coat. And when he wears a rainbow coat, he says, okay, well, white is all the colors mixed together into rainbow. So he wears a rainbow coat because he's broken up. That's played by Lee. What's his name? From Wicker Man and from Star Wars Episode 2.
Christopher Lee.
Anyway.
Oh, God. Did someone say it just now? I can't say it louder.
Christopher Lee.
Christopher Lee. Thank you. Christopher Lee. Okay, so the only thing that Peter Jackson didn't fuck up in the whole Lord of the Rings series, my girlfriend's so pissed that I just said that. But the only thing he didn't fuck up, and I'm not saying that like without, she's like, I'm getting out of the car. But shuffling the story together was fine. I like it. I'm just saying the only thing he didn't fuck up properly was Christopher Lee, because Christopher Lee is the most perverted, narcissistic, hypersexual pervert in the world, and he played a perfect Saruman. And Saruman in general, that's like the idea. Wait, I forget what we're tying it to. I was so trying to find out who Christopher Lee was. Oh well. Christopher Lee playing compared to who were we comparing it to, Ben, a second ago? What? Jason, you compared Christopher Lee to what? Well, no, I compared him to what? Saruman. Saruman was compared to whom?
Oh no, all that was a conversation with Ben. I just offered the name Christopher Lee.
Oh, that was Nathan. Oh, thank you, Nathan. You're the best for offering that name. I literally don't remember why it mattered. I was so deep in my autism. Sorry.
Oh no, I just said John D as
John
popular
D.
image of him is kind of like Saruman because he's not Gandalf. He's a little bit too dark for that. He gets credit for just breaking up the Spanish Armada that was going to invade West England.
Yeah,
I think you have to do a lot of blood sacrifices or something like that.
That was exactly correct. Please, somebody make a note of that because that was a convoluted explanation. But Saruman is John D. And I stand by that. I think that was actually the intention by J.R.R. Tolkien. There's also another character, Chronicles of Narnia, and in Damien, C.S.S. Lewis does, that's correlated with Saruman. I forget the name of it now. My mom will be scolding me for that. But there is a C.S.S. Lewis equivalent. C-double-S. But yeah, Saruman, his idea in the book is he's crazy for love of evil.
Yeah,
and so John D was all about trying to have sex with his best friend's wife, not because he really liked her, but because he really liked his best friend. So he wanted to destroy his best friend. It's a very Aleister Crowley move to do, very Tyler Durden move to do. So it's kind of gnarly that people do that. But in general, they try to say evil doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is a nine angle. So we need to produce as much existential manipulation as possible. And that's why Saruman, his coat, even though it's supposed to be white, is a rainbow because it's a diffraction of all the crepuscles.
It's crazy. The white being all of the spectrum from the red to the blue. I just watched two of the trilogy of The Hobbit recently, past 2 weeks, and I noticed before Saruman turns bad, they're all telling him, well, there's gonna be this great evil in the future, and it's gonna march over the earth and massive destruction. He's like, oh, this hasn't existed in millennia. There's no proof of any of this, and he's super rejectant to it and resistant. So it's almost like that's why Sauron, the Dark Lord, chose him. But the lore has it that he was a secret lover to the Queen. And she had him do all the magical rituals, but then when they had to save England from the Spanish, they got into dark black magic. And then after that, he was beholden to demons, and they demanded a continuous blood sacrifice for the remainder of time, which is all the way up to the present era. And they had this thing in the movies called the Palantir. Well, in the book, it's a crystal ball used for communications and a means of seeing events in other parts of the world or distant the future. And they said that John Dee was the master of these crystal ball things and that only he and one apprentice he had to read them. And it's just really odd. I don't know.
Did I lose everyone?
I was just thinking the same thing. I was just about to jump out of the room and come back in. Sound got messed up. It's not.
John D is such the depth of the kids. I mean, he's not. He gets so much credit for being evil, and not enough credit for what he did. And he's not that bad in a sense. He gave up fame and fortune in order to produce gold. He didn't keep it. and he wasn't famous. The people who think he's famous, he could have been Rumpelstiltskin, but instead he's the guy that the creepy Rumpelstiltskins talk about sometimes and whisper. You know what I mean? He's not quite as bad, but think of him as. And I don't know. I kind of wonder about what really happened with him, because the stories sound too close to the Joseph Smith stories of the Umm and Thummim, stones where you decrypt the sigils from Deseret. I don't think he was necessarily. Well, I'm not saying he was good, perhaps, but I don't think he was necessarily what we understand him to be. He clearly was very important, and he probably was manipulated, because if he wasn't, maybe we'd remember him as a saint. I don't know, or maybe we'd remember him as more of a villain. But at some point, he probably just walked away from everything, just not to give gold to the people in charge.
That might have been when he wrote.
I'm just saying it feels like it's a plausibility.
Yeah.
I hate him so much, and yet still mention he knew how to do stuff.
I deeply admire him. History is fascinating.
This podcast has given me a lot to think about. It's definitely worth a rewatch. So I am glad that Lee has this on his website for everybody to come back and enjoy it. So, if we missed it, we can always go back and rewatch it right there with Cloud Therapy in the background. He's always showing these amazing sky anomalies. I know he's recording, so there's a plug, guys. Go to Disintegral. Oh, I always say I butcher your name, Lee. I'm so sorry. Of his channel.
Disintegral, because I like the math. It mirrors and reflections and stuff in integers or like that.
Disintegral. But yeah, I think that's wonderful way to branch out and help other people realize the equality and how many different people Lenny brings on with different thought patterns and information without, discounting or discrediting. Everybody's point is valid, and it's good. It's pleasant. It's nice. This is a good thing you've got here, Lenny. Appreciate it very much. I don't know if you've noticed I've been kind of coming in here, but I'll tell you, time has been going very slow for me, this past month. I'm sure you know why. But when I come and I listen to your shows, that 2 hours goes by too fast for me. So that's a high compliment. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
It goes by very fast for me on most days. Today it went extremely slow because I was taking in a lot and expanding the amount of time it took to get more value from it. And we at one point today had 20 people in the room.
So. Oh, yeah. Your studio audience. Oh, I was going to ask you if there's any possible way of lightening up our names on studio audience. Because when somebody's saying something in there, we can't tell who's saying it. And if we're trying to answer or conversate back and forth, I can't see it. I mean, I know it's not your fault that I'm blind, but I can't see their names. I can't see my own. So I didn't.
No. What she's saying.
I mean, the way we do it in Tartary Nova, if you look at Xirtus' Discord, I'm not saying we're an expert on anything. We're just kind of creatively messing with the problem. Things making it worse.
Well,
is that we've added a hue, a range of hue to precision.
Because you can
and then You have people that shine and they're in the light. And if you're somebody in a high position, you can people, you know what they can. And so I mean, there are ways to however, you know, that's maybe critical. I had to create a permanent and the main before creating programming for technology, we're trying to make their tools that I think is true. If you want it, maybe 3. I don't know how, you know, this is totally your own social thing, but it's theoretically possible to add colors and then privileges to people that have been here for a longer period of time. And I mean, I have personally found it useful myself.
Yeah, and the roles when you set up a role for somebody, I mean, you could set up a
It's got this whole shiver nerd. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, you can, because I had a room for a while too, but you can pick different colors that, or at least we can see them. Because against the black background, it's just difficult.
Did that change that I just made help?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. I can see people's names now.
I like the color choices.
Thank you very much.
Is it working again?
Ah, makes it hard to hear.
I know it went by slow, maybe slower for you, but it still is
Yes, still in
nice.
fast relative.
To me, yeah, to what, you know, time is relative to what is going on around us in our perception. And it just seems like when you're having your worst times, time goes really slow. And then when you're having fun, time goes by really fast. That's why I think, you know, when you punch in for work, you're like, you know, gotta be here 8 hours, and it drags on and on. Even with school, you know. But then you get out of school and you're like, what? It's already time to go home and eat dinner. No, it's only been like 30 minutes. And then you find out, no, it's really been like 4.5 hours. So it's amazing. But
sounds like the waiting place from Dr. Seuss in Oh, the Places You Can Go.
Nice.
It's one of those things where when you're waiting for something, time takes forever and never seems to happen. Waiting for the band to play, waiting for the train to come. And he talks about it, but that's one of my favorite philosophy books, Oh, the Places You Can Go.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those Dr. Seuss books that's like the Lorax. It's more of a story than a children's book, but well worth it.
Yeah.
Since you know that stuff, Dr. Seuss stuff, Lenny, do you remember the story about the little island that was under seawater? I mean, under sea level, and it was and there were roots of trees that were all the way around that protected this little island that was under sea level. And then there were fish that would come and try to eat the roots so that the water would come in and destroy the people. Do you remember that story? The Dr. Seuss story?
I don't.
Well, golly, never been able to find.
Maybe. Or maybe I didn't have full access to all the Dr. Seuss books because it was one of those things that I had when I was a child, and then I collected again when my children were children. But of all the different books, I think Oh, the Places You Can Go is the only one that's still in my collection somewhere. Yeah, I think we did very excellent. I've got Bridget coming on as the guest tomorrow. Okay.